Chapter 22 of The Black Star by Johnston McCulley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Roger Moline. Chapter 22 On the Scent. He's done it! He said he'd make me a laughing-stock, and he's done it! Verbeck's exclamation brought them to their senses. They stepped through the door. There was a blanket, a store of provisions, a telephone that they knew without examination had been connected with the one in the living room below, and the end of the dictograph wire. Fastened to the telephone were several sheets of paper. Verbeck tore them away, and while Muggs and Riley held their torches, he read in a low voice the Black Star's message. Mr. Roger Verbeck, I am assuming you have answered the call of the damsel and have followed the wire. The snow is somewhat deeper than when the wire was stretched by me, and possibly you have been put to some inconvenience, but it was necessary, I assure you. I trust you liked your trip through the old sewer. I thank you for your hospitality, for here I have lived beneath your roof since escaping the silly police. I thank you cordially for the police protection afforded me while the chief had his dragnet in operation. It was amusing to look from the window and watch the officers guarding the house carefully to see that I was not disturbed. "If ever I get my hands on that devil!" Riley exclaimed. "Keep still, Riley. Let me finish it. There may be need for haste yet." Verbeck read on. I said I'd make you a laughing-stock, and I have. Tonight I send letters to the papers telling them how I hid in your own house, listened to all your plans over a dictograph, and tapped your telephone wire. You cannot hope to match wits with the Black Star. It was very simple. I came here the night I escaped, after visiting your apartment and mailing a few letters. Only 2 of my band knew of my whereabouts and aided me, one of them the charming woman who told you to follow the wire. The second night I strung the dictograph wire, tapped the telephone, and carried my provisions here. Then I attacked the apartment-house clerk. I felt very confident you'd move here after that, and I guessed correctly. You came. I rested and ate and listened to your conversations. At night, by means of a candle, I signaled from the window to a friend, who took down my messages for the papers and the chief of police. It has been great entertainment, I assure you. It was very convenient for me to keep in touch in this way. That's sarcasm for you, Riley exploded. Quiet, Verbeck demanded, and read on. Is there anything to explain? Ah, yes. My mode of entrance was not through the door. I strung the wire to the wall and through the hole there, retreated after covering my tracks with dust, and entered in a different place. Perhaps you know your old family estate, Mr. Verbeck, and perhaps not. If you will look at the end of this closet, you'll see a section of wall that can be removed. I fixed that. It opens into an old, wide chimney. At some time when the house was remodeled and the new chimney built, a part of this old one was left intact, probably to save the trouble of remodeling the garret. Inside the chimney you will find a rope ladder. Not very well made, it is true, yet serviceable. Descend, and you'll be able to get into the new chimney. Go down far enough, and you will find yourself beside the hood over the kitchen stove. By extending a hand down while you 3 were in the living room, I was able to put on your loaf of bread the black stars that bothered you so much. I was able in the same manner to tap Mr. Muggs on the head as he bent over his pots and pans. It was a scientific tap, and as he reeled, I clutched him by the collar and decorated his forehead with a star. Very simple, I assure you. I nearly laughed aloud when Riley built the big fire to smoke me out if I happened to be in the chimney. I had got back into the old chimney, of course, and closed the opening by that time. Thanks once more for your splendid hospitality. Tonight being the time for my best effort so far in your city, I must leave you. My new headquarters have been arranged by my friends, and I am sure they'll prove much more comfortable. I'll direct my work from there hereafter. Since I had to get away from your house, I had a certain woman call you up and tell you to follow the wire. I knew it would take an hour or two for you to do so. After you had gone, I descended the chimney, slipped out of the back door. At least, that is what I intend doing after writing this letter, and I am sure my plans will come out all right. I would like to use your splendid roadster again as I leave, but cannot, as I have made other plans. And now, Mr. Verbeck, search this closet well, and you'll find a short note telling you what I intend doing tonight. The search may delay you a little, and delay will help me. As Verbeck finished reading and crammed the letter into his pocket, Riley, muttering madly to himself, began pawing among the Black Star's provisions in search of the note. Muggs attacked a pile of old toys in a corner. Verbeck stood still in the center of the closet for a moment, astounded. The Black Star had hidden in his house, with the police guard around it. The Black Star had sent word to the newspapers of what he had done. Laughingstock! Roger Verbeck would not dare show his face among his friends, unless— There was one way to wipe out this slur the Black Star had thrown upon him, by capturing the master criminal at his work. Verbeck joined in the search. Working frantically, they hurled toys around the closet, scattered cans and boxes of provisions, shook blankets. Then Verbeck remembered the opening in the wall, and sought until he found it. There, pinned to the top rung of the crude rope ladder, was the note. "Read it quick, boss," Muggs begged. "I want to get my hands on that crook. I'll show him how to tap me on the head." Verbeck read quickly. "As you have said, I love jewels, especially diamonds. There is a new shipment in the city that exceeds in value even your famous necklace, Mr. Verbeck. The general public does not know of this shipment, which has just been received. But having ways of finding out things, I do know of it. Tonight I raid the vault of Jones & Company, diamond importers, on the second floor of the National Building." With a roar that could have been heard half a block, Detective Riley sprang through the door and toward the head of the stairs, Muggs and Roger Verbeck at his heels. 4 steps at a time they took the 2 flights, and burst into the living room like madmen, startling the officers there. "Quick!" Riley cried to the sergeant. "Call headquarters, private line. Tell them to surround block of National Building. Black Star's raiding Jones & Company. You, Muggs, start the car. Ready, Verbeck?" The sergeant whirled toward them. "Phone's dead. Wire's cut, I suppose," he reported. "Of course. Trust the Black Star not to forget that. Get the nearest phone, Sergeant. Probably one across street." He dashed out, following Verbeck. They sprang into the roadster. Muggs sent the machine shooting at the big gate, through it, into the broad boulevard, sounding his horn like a maniac, jumping the powerful engine into its greatest speed. End of chapter 22. Recording by Roger Moline. Chapter 23 of The Black Star by Johnston McCulley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Roger Moline. Chapter 23. Into the Vault. Verbeck and Muggs had taken many wild rides in the big roadster, but nothing that compared to this. On the boulevard, the street cleaners had removed most of the snow, but the slush had frozen, and the going was treacherous. The car skidded from side to side, at times almost turned end for end, lurched and swayed sickeningly. Detective Riley gritted his teeth and clung to one end of the seat in which Verbeck crouched. Muggs bent forward, squinting his eyes and trying to get a clear view ahead. They turned corners and swept around curves at dangerous speed, sprang down hills as if the car was some wild thing running for life from a hereditary foe. It was 2:30 in the morning, and few vehicles were abroad, a fact for which Muggs gave devout thanks. They reached the edge of the business district, yet he did not slacken the car's speed. Detective Riley had said no word since the start. Now he was the sleuth on the trail, the officer of the law ready to try conclusions with the criminal. Neither did Roger Verbeck speak, not even to shriek orders to Muggs, for Muggs did not need orders, and Verbeck was thinking of the humiliation in store for him unless the master criminal was caught. Muggs dodged an owl car by less than a foot and took a corner on two wheels. Riley would have been dashed from the machine had not Verbeck flung an arm around him. Down another hill they raced, and into a cross street, where the heavy traffic of the day had obliterated the most of the slush, and the going was safer. They were within a few blocks of their destination now. Verbeck and Riley were both wondering if the sergeant had been able to get to another telephone and notify headquarters. The Black Star might have a chance of escape if the block was not surrounded. And they were not certain that he had not committed his theft and escaped already. He had had plenty of time while they were following the dictograph wire, especially since it was certain his plans had been made carefully. Would they arrive in time to find him at work? Or would they find the door of the vault open and a fortune in jewels gone? Riley bent over and screeched in Muggs' ear, "Stop that horn! And stop the machine at the corner this way!" Muggs nodded that he understood. He drove around another corner and swung the roadster to a stop. Riley sprang to the walk, Verbeck and Muggs following closely. They hurried around the corner and to the entrance of the big building. Automatics and electric torches were held ready now. There was no watchman in the entrance, and they started to creep up the stairs to the second floor. And there, at the top of the marble steps, just in front of the heavy glass doors that opened into the establishment of Jones and Company, they found the watchman. He was stretched on the floor, bound and gagged and with a black star on his forehead. Riley motioned for silence and relieved the watchman of gag and ropes. "He slipped up on me," the man whispered. "He's inside now." "Only one?" "Just one man," the watchman whispered. "He tapped me on the head and had me gagged before I knew what was happening. Then he bound me. I'm sure there was only one man. He unlocked the door with a key." "How long ago?" "Half an hour or more." "Then he's gone out some other way," Riley whispered to the others. "He wouldn't stay in there that long. What's the matter with headquarters, I wonder? I don't hear any siren. Here, you, watchman, go down and tell the men when they come to surround the block, and send a few in here. We'll go on in." The watchman tottered to the top of the stairs and started down. Riley drew Verbeck and Muggs close to him. "No lights until we're sure where we stand," he instructed. "He may be ready to shoot, if he's still in there, and a light furnishes a swell target. There'll be a faint light inside, reflected from the stairs. I know this place. This is the only entrance except a freight elevator at the rear. There are windows, of course, that open into the court. I'm afraid he's gone that way. Ready? Come on, then, and keep your eyes open." Inch by inch Riley swung the glass door open, so as not to make any sound. Inch by inch they crept inside, and closed the door again. Here the aisles were covered with thick carpets. An uncertain light came through the door and made the interior of the gem store a mass of shadows. Before them was the general retail sales room, with its rows of counters and showcases on either side, and its divans and chairs in the center. Slowly, carefully, holding weapons and torches ready, they crept from shadow to shadow, scarcely daring to breathe, fearing they would make a sound. They soon were convinced nobody was in the salesroom. They came to the partition in the rear and found the door partly open. Here they redoubled their caution. If the Black Star was present, he was somewhere behind that partition. Riley opened the door carefully, and they stepped inside. Here they found a dim light, too, coming in from the street. Here were tables where diamonds were displayed to purchasing merchants, sets of mirrors so an employee could see the entire interior at a glance, and at the opposite end of the room, the door to the great vault of Jones & Company, the vault that held always a fortune in jewels and was supposed to be impregnable. They crouched and looked. Verbeck drew in his breath sharply. The door of the vault stood open. In it, his back toward them, gloating over a handful of jewels, was the Black Star. As they watched, they heard him chuckle softly, saw him throw up his head, and walk into the vault. End of chapter 23. Recording by Roger Moline. Chapter 24 of The Black Star by Johnston McCulley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Roger Moline. Chapter 24. How It Ended. Verbeck's whisper was so low that Riley and Muggs scarcely could hear it, yet they could detect the note of exultation. "We've got him!" That was all, and then they started to creep forward, their eyes on the vault, from which not a bit of light came. The Black Star evidently was working in the dark. Foot by foot they made their way noiselessly toward the open door, expecting every instant to see their quarry step forth and confront them, ready to prevent him fighting his way to liberty. They listened, too, for the sound of feet in the room behind them that would tell of the arrival of the police, but the sound of feet did not come. And now, at last, they were within 6 feet of the open door, staring into the blackness of the vault, from which came not the slightest sound. Verbeck felt his heart pounding at his ribs, like a trip-hammer, as they waited. The seconds passed. Then Riley spoke in a low, tense tone, yet his voice seemed to roar through the place. "Come out, Mr. Black Star. We've got you." Silence their answer. "Come out. Why delay the game?" Still no answer. Riley reached out and touched Verbeck, touched Muggs, a voiceless command for action. They crept forward again, Verbeck to one side, Muggs on the other, Riley directly before the door. Now they were in the shadows, and between them and the door was but a faint streak of light, that came through the windows from the street. A streak of light they would have to cross to reach the vault door. What would happen when they crossed that streak of light? Riley imagined he knew. Verbeck felt sure that he knew. Muggs already imagined he heard the cracking of an automatic, grunts of pain, faced the whirlwind charge of a desperate, cornered man fighting his way to freedom. "Come out!" Riley commanded again. "Come, or we'll come in after you." Still no answer. Riley crouched and held the torch high above his head in his left hand, ready to touch the button and send a shaft of light into the vault. In his right hand he held the automatic, safety catch off, ready to fire on the instant. He touched the button. Light shot through the blackness and illuminated a pathway through the vault door and to the interior. From side to side Riley swung his light, expecting every instant to hear the shot he anticipated. There was no man in the light's path, but it did not penetrate to the corners. Riley expelled his breath in a great gasp of determination and slipped forward. Verbeck and Muggs closed in. If the Black Star was waiting for them to rush, then the moment for the rush had arrived. Muggs could endure the suspense no longer. His nerves were on edge. He gave a subdued squeal and sprang across the path of light, grasped the door, hurled it shut, twisted the handle. "We've got him! Got him!" he screeched. Riley's light showed the perspiration standing out on his forehead in great globules. "Why did you do that?" the detective demanded. "We've got him! Turn on the lights. The police will be here in a minute. Then he'll have no chance to escape." Riley would have had it otherwise, and Roger Verbeck had anticipated having the Black Star in shackles by the time the police arrived, but that could not be helped now. Riley went around the room until he found the electric switch. He threw it, and the room was suddenly brilliant with light. "Well, we've got him anyway," Verbeck said. "The Black Star may be able to get into a vault, but I'll defy him to get out of that one except by the door." "Yes, and he'll be dead before he gets out that way, if someone who can open that vault doesn't come soon. Where's a telephone?" He saw one in a corner and rushed toward it and gave the private number. "That you, Chief?" he asked. "This is Riley. Have you sent men?" "What's that? Just started? Great Scott! He did, eh? Say, Chief, have the desk sergeant telephone to the manager of Jones & Company to hurry down here. We've got the Black Star locked in the vault, and have to get it unlocked." "Yes, sure." He hung up the receiver and turned to the others. "Men on the way," he said. "The chief says he just got the telephone message. Says the sergeant said he tried 3 phones near your place, and all of them had wires cut. Pretty smooth article, that Black Star, but we've got him. There they come now." From the distance came the sound of a siren, the clanging of a patrol wagon bell. Then the pounding feet on the marble stairs, loud commands, and men rushed into the establishment of Jones & Company. "We've got him!" Riley exulted. "Caught him at it. Locked him in the vault. And now we'll stand around until the manager gets here and works the combination. He played a smooth game, all right. Ask Mr. Verbeck about it. But we got him. I reckon he's mighty sorry now that he stayed in town to make a fool out of Mr. Verbeck." They waited, crowding around the place, talking excitedly in whispers, debating whether the Black Star would put up a fight when the door was opened, whether he'd commit suicide and cheat the law now that he was cornered. Then the chief came beaming, dreaming of the vindication of his department the newspapers would have to grant. He grasped Verbeck by the hand warmly, patted Muggs on the back, congratulated Detective Riley. "I didn't tip off the reporters this time," he said. "Too late for 'em anyway. They'll get it in the noon edition today, though. Laugh at the police department, will they? Not after this." And then the manager of Jones & Company arrived, a gentleman the personification of dignity generally, but at present the personification of excitement and dread. He stammered when he talked, and threw up his hands in horror when he saw his establishment crowded with police, and it took the chief some minutes to assure him that his property was safe, and the would-be thief locked in the vault. He advanced to the door and prepared to work the combination. His nervousness caused him to make a mistake at first, but finally he nodded that all that was necessary to open the door was to turn the handle. The manager retreated then, to hide behind a showcase in fear of flying bullets. "Might as well come out, Mr. Black Star, and take your medicine," Riley cried. "We've got 20 men here, with guns pointing at that door. You make a hostile move when we open it, and you'll see your finish." He nodded to the police, twisted the handle, and threw the door open. Light flooded the interior of the vault. Half a dozen officers, Riley at their head, rushed. A cry of consternation came from the detective. Verbeck and Muggs crowded through to look inside. On the floor of the vault were empty trays that had held jewels. Among them were empty chamois bags. Mountings of inferior value were scattered about. But no master criminal stood before them, ready for battle or in token of surrender. "Gone!" Muggs cried. "But he can't be gone!" Riley shrieked. "We saw him step into the vault. We came right up, never taking our eyes from the door. Muggs slammed the door and twisted the combination. There's no way in or out except the door." "Gone!" Verbeck echoed. The chief of police swore. The manager of Jones & Company, who had left his place of safety, tore his hair and lamented his loss and berated the police. He can't be gone," Riley reiterated. Verbeck, his heart sinking, stepped inside and looked around. Fastened in the corner of one of the trays was what he had feared he would find: a letter written by the Black Star and addressed to himself. He read it swiftly, then handed it to the chief and threw wide his hands in a gesture of momentary despair. And this is what he had read: "Mr. Verbeck and aides. I am leaving this because I assume you'll find my other note at the house and follow me here. I dare say that, when you entered, you saw me standing before the open door of the vault. You watched, and saw me enter the vault. Did you not? You did not. Your eyes deceived you. I intend waiting here until you arrive, to add one more small bit to my evening's entertainment. Illusion, my dear Mr. Verbeck, all illusion. The dim light coming in from the street, you know, helps some. You will notice that there are many mirrors scattered around the room. I took the liberty of moving a few of them to serve my purpose. Go back to the door at which you entered and look at the vault. Have your silly Muggs stand 10 feet to the right of the door to the room. Now look at the vault, Mr. Verbeck, and it will appear that the silly Muggs is standing in the vault door. You follow? Simple, old-fashioned mirror illusion that won't even go at country fairs any more. And you fell for that. For when you entered the room, I shall be standing within 10 feet of you, and you'll imagine you see me in the vault door and creep forward. I'll take 2 steps to the right, and you'll think I have entered the vault. You'll advance toward it, and I'll step outside quietly to the window that opens on the court, let myself down a rope already prepared, and be on my way, with this excellent collection of diamonds. All thought out beforehand, you see. I have made you a laughing-stock, as I promised, but I am not done with you yet. I defy you again, Roger Verbeck, as I defy the police. You'll hear from me soon." They snapped out the lights and tried it, Muggs standing where the Black Star had said, and found it was so. They went to the court and found an open window from which a rope dangled to the ground floor below. Then they placed a guard and went out, leaving the manager to estimate and bemoan his loss. "He's a devil, the chief was muttering. "He's human, and we'll get him yet," Roger Verbeck answered, and the fighting look was in his face when he spoke. End of chapter 24. Recording by Roger Moline. Chapter 25 of The Black Star by Johnston McCulley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Roger Moline. Chapter 25. Shadowed by Three. Roger Verbeck's powerful four-seated roadster, its curtains up against the fine drizzle of rain, and with Muggs at the wheel, drew up when the traffic policeman raised a warning hand and waited for the crosstown stream of vehicles and pedestrians to pass. It was 8 o'clock in the evening, and the streets were thronged. Crowds were hurrying toward the theaters, more crowds were making for a big automobile show, and others were hastening towards a large hall, where there was to be a mass meeting at which infuriated speakers would demand that the police department of the city capture instantly the Black Star, the notorious master criminal, who, with his band of clever crooks, had terrorized the city for half a year. Verbeck's car was of foreign make and of peculiar appearance, and it was natural that it should be recognized. Muggs bent over the wheel and gritted his teeth as he heard the expressions passed by pedestrians, and the young man beside him looked straight ahead as if seeing nothing and hearing nothing. "When you going to get the Black Star?" "What's Black Star paying you to hold off, Verbeck?" "That crook's too much for you, ain't he?" "Well, well, so he hasn't caught you again?" Those were samples of the remarks being passed, and they made Muggs want to get from the roadster and fight his way into the midst of the mob. Muggs knew better than anyone else how Verbeck, since the memorial day when the Black Star had dared the young millionaire to capture him, had tried every means in his power to get hands on the master criminal. The Black Star had written again to Roger Verbeck, saying that he and his man Muggs would be abducted by the Black Star's men, taken to the master crook's new headquarters, for which they had been searching in vain, and from there taken to the scene of a big crime. They would be forced to stand by under guard and watch the crime committed, and then they would be treated to shots from the vapor gun the Black Star and his men used, and left unconscious on the spot, laughing-stocks for the public. That letter had been sent to the newspapers 3 weeks before, and as yet the Black Star had not abducted Roger Verbeck and Muggs. The criminal, in another letter to the papers, insisted that this was not because he had not had an opportunity to effect the abduction, but because preparations had not been completed for the next big crime. So now, as Verbeck's roadster waited at the corner, those who recognized the car and its occupants enjoyed a few moments of sarcastic abuse. It was nothing to the general public that Verbeck had spent time and money in an effort to capture the master criminal after the police had failed, that he had risked his life half a score of times, and once even had been accused of belonging to the Black Star's band himself. The unthinking public looked only at results, and there had been none. Muggs and Verbeck and the few thinkers in the city knew well that if the Black Star was caught, these thoughtless ones would be the first to praise Verbeck loudly, but in the meantime the sarcasm was highly unpleasant. After a time the traffic cop turned and raised a hand, and Muggs growled again, and threw in the clutch and piloted the heavy car across the street and down the broad avenue. They were out of the congested district within a few minutes, and speeding along a boulevard that led to a section of the city where large and modern apartment houses were to be found. Half a block behind Verbeck's roadster, a man trailed on a motorcycle, seemingly paying no attention to the car ahead, but in reality keeping close watch on it. A short distance behind the motorcycle trailed a runabout with one man in it. The runabout was a small car, but a mechanician could have told after a second glance that it was a powerful one. The man in the runabout was watching both the motorcycle and Verbeck's car. A short distance behind the runabout was a lightweight truck. Behind the wheel of the truck was a young man who appeared eager to get home after an overtime delay in making deliveries. He wore greasy overalls and jumper, and a slouch hat pulled well down over his eyes. The collar of the jumper was turned up to keep out the drizzle. Thus the procession moved along the broad boulevard, and after a time Verbeck's roadster drew up at the curb in front of an imposing apartment house. Muggs remained behind the wheel, but the man he had been driving got out and hurried into the building. It was natural that he did so, for on the ground floor lived his fiancée. The threat of abduction, it appeared, did not keep Roger Verbeck from paying his customary visits to his sweetheart. The man on the motorcycle pulled in at the curb on the opposite side of the street, dismounted, and appeared to be tinkering with his machine. The runabout passed him, and its driver bent out and spoke a few words as it passed, the motorcyclist nodding in reply. Then the runabout went around the next corner, where it stopped, its driver getting out and walking slowly back up the boulevard, like a belated laborer on his way home. The light truck did not pass Verbeck's car. It turned into an alley and pulled up behind a garage there. Its driver got out and walked quickly back to the mouth of the alley, and there he peered around the corner of a high fence and down the boulevard. He noticed that the motorcyclist had left his machine and crossed the street and was approaching Verbeck's roadster. He saw the man who had been driving the runabout walking slowly from the other direction. The driver of the truck chuckled lightly to himself and remained at the mouth of the alley in the shadows, watching. End of chapter 25. Recording by Roger Moline. Chapter 26 of The Black Star by Johnston McCulley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Roger Moline. Chapter 26. A Man of Mystery. Muggs, crouched down behind the wheel, watched the fine rain beat against the windshield of the roadster, and hoped he would not have to remain in that position of inaction for long. He observed a man approaching along the sidewalk, a man who glanced at the apartment houses as if seeking a certain one. Directly opposite the roadster this man stopped, looked around for an instant, and then hurried over to Muggs. "Know where the Albemarle apartments might be?" he asked. "They might be almost any place, but I've got an idea you'll find them in the middle of the next block," Muggs replied. "It's a big, white brick building." "Thanks," the other growled. He turned away, and as quickly turned back again. Reflection from the light on the corner flashed from something he held in his hand. A small cloud of vapor rushed at Muggs's face. Muggs gasped, and his head fell forward. Instantly the other man sprang into the roadster, lifted the unconscious form of Muggs from the driver's seat, and placed it in the rear seat, afterward throwing a robe over it. Then he took Muggs's place behind the wheel, crouched forward, waiting. The motorcyclist stopped beside the roadster at this moment. "Got him all right?" he asked. "Cinch. Muggs is now sleeping peacefully in the rear behind a heavy robe. I sure caught him off guard." "Well, Verbeck is the next job. He may stay in there talking to his girl half the night, and he may be out in 3 minutes. It'll be a game of wait, I guess. I'll hang around to give help if you need it, and be ready to jump in as soon as you get him. You gave Muggs a heavy shot, didn't you?" "I guess he's good for half an hour in Dreamland, all right." "Verbeck wants to get a heavy shot, too. When we get out on the river road, we can bind and gag the two of 'em. Careful now. If we miss out on this, the big boss'll half kill us. I ain't never failed him yet. Not the "Cut it!" the motorcyclist exclaimed. "Be gentle with that name around these parts. This is the home of Verbeck's fiancée, remember, and heaven knows what sort of cops may be posted around here. I'd better duck now." He left the roadster and walked a short distance down the street, finally coming to a stop against a wall. There he waited in the shadows, as did the driver of the light truck at the mouth of the alley. The truck driver had witnessed the undoing of Muggs, and had chuckled some at it, but had made no move to interfere. Little cared he if the Black Star's men rendered Roger Verbeck's chauffeur unconscious and hurled him into the rear of the roadster. 15 minutes passed. The motorcyclist left his retreat and walked up and down the street now and then. The man in Verbeck's car remained crouched behind the wheel of the machine, and the truck driver at the alley's mouth did not change his position. Then the front door of the apartment house was opened, and a man and woman stood framed in it for a moment. The woman stepped back, and the door was closed again. The man turned up the collar of his raincoat and stepped briskly down the steps and toward the waiting roadster. The watcher at the mouth of the alley betrayed some interest now. The motorcyclist left his place of seclusion and walked forward slowly, head bent as if against the force of the storm. "Home, Muggs!" The man who had taken Muggs's place reached forward as he heard the words and found the seat beside him occupied. And for the second time that evening he turned swiftly and discharged a cloud of vapor from the pistol he carried. For the second time also that vapor rendered a man unconscious instantly. "Great! Walked right into the trap." It was the motorcyclist who spoke. He got into the car and aided his companion in putting the second unconscious man in the rear, under the robe. "Better let her out now," he went on. "We've got 'em both, Verbeck and Muggs. I reckon we caught 'em off their guard. They didn't expect to get that vapor stuff right here in the boulevard. Great idea of the boss to always give a man what he doesn't expect. I guess this'll put a crimp into young and handsome Mr. Verbeck. Nail the boss, will he? Huh!" The other had turned the roadster, and now it darted up the boulevard at a speed perilously near the limit allowed by city ordinance. From the mouth of the alley darted the light truck, and took up the pursuit. The driver of it was chuckling again, evidently at the ease with which the Black Star's men had made Verbeck and Muggs captives. The Verbeck roadster led the way up the boulevard, and after a time turned into a side street. Down a long hill it dashed, with the light truck following less than a block behind. Traffic was passing in both directions, but the speed of roadster and truck did not diminish to any great extent. Now the residence district was left behind, and the two machines were passing through the dark wholesale district. Here the truck dropped a short distance behind, and its driver glanced around frequently to see whether any other machine was following. And then a railroad crossing was reached, and the roadster was forced to stop against the gates while a long freight train was pulled slowly by. The truck drove up and stopped behind it. The driver got down and stepped across the sidewalk and into a cheap saloon on the corner there. He came out again almost instantly, puffing at a cigar he had purchased. He stood beside his truck, looking at the train, shaking the raindrops from his coat collar. The two men in the front seats of the roadster glanced at him, but apparently he gave them no attention. The end of the train rattled past, the gates began to lift. The roadster started slowly forward across the tracks. The man who had been driving the truck gave a quick spring and landed on the rear of the roadster, where there was a broad bulge in the body with an extra wheel lashed upon it. Top and curtains were up. The men in the roadster could not see him. They were in the poorer part of the city now, and presently at the end of the paved streets. Here there began a road that curved along the river, and after striking this road, the man driving the roadster got all speed possible out of his machine. The other crept into the rear end, lifted the robe, gave the two prisoners fresh shots from the vapor gun, and then bound and gagged them. On and on they rushed through the night, the wheels hurling mud in all directions, the brilliant headlights cutting a path through the darkness. They came to a bridge, and so crossed the river. Here the man who rode on the rear end of the car was exposed twice as it flashed under the bridge lights, but no bridge tender observed him. It was a bad night. The tenders merely stepped to the doors of their tiny houses, saw that a motor car was passing, and let it go at that. On the other side of the river the speed of the car decreased. After a time the machine was driven from the main road into a sort of lane. Here the going was slower yet, for the mud was deep and the roadbed cut into deep ruts. The car lurched from side to side in such fashion that the man who rode behind was almost hurled off. He could hear the men in the car talking now. "Nearly there. Better dim the headlights," one of them was saying. Instantly the headlights were dimmed, and in the semi-darkness the car plowed on through the mud. Now it approached an old house, from one window of which a light flashed. The car was stopped. The man who had been riding behind dropped off into the mud and crept through the black night toward the fence. One at a time the two unconscious prisoners were taken from the roadster, carried through a gate up a walk, and to the front door of the old house. A bell would tinkle, the door would be opened, the prisoner handed over. After that had been done, the roadster, with all lights out, was turned around and left in front of the gate. Then the men who had accomplished the abduction entered the house, and the one light that had shone from a window was extinguished. Now the man who had been crouching against the fence moved rapidly, yet with extreme caution. He crept past the gate, and where a great tree threw its branches over the fence, he vaulted over. Standing against the trunk of the tree, he waited for a time in silence, listening intently for some noise that would tell of a human being near. He heard nothing but the moaning of the wind, the beating of the river against the shore, the soft patter of the rain on the leaves. He crept forward again, a few feet at a time, and finally reached the side of the house. He listened near a window, but could hear nothing. He found the window fastened, went on to another, and found that locked also. Now he sensed something near him, but it seemed to be animal rather than human. His hand dived into a pocket and came out with one of the Black Star's vapor guns. With his back against the side of the house, he listened and waited. He was sure now that he could hear breathing. Then he made out two eyes glaring at him in the darkness. Those eyes seemed to flicker for an instant, and in that instant the man lurched quickly to one side. A body fell against him. He heard a snarl. He sank to his knees, grasped a hairy throat, discharged the vapor gun, and felt the body relax. His hands worked swiftly in the darkness on a mission of exploration. He was chuckling again as he got upon his feet. So the Black Star did not depend wholly on human beings to guard him. He had trained dogs. Should there be another dog, he might sound an alarm before the vapor gun got in its work. The prowler knew that, and so he hesitated no longer, but hurried around the end of the house. Here he found a cellar window unlocked. A moment later he was inside the house. He had an electric torch in a pocket, but feared to flash it here. Again he listened for a time, and then felt his way around the wall, and so came to a flight of steps. Up these he crept, to find a locked door at the top. Once more he listened, and seemed to hear voices coming from a distance. He reached in another pocket, drew forth a key of peculiar shape, and worked at the lock of the door for some time. On the other side a key fell out with a clatter. He waited fully a minute, scarcely daring to breathe, but decided at the end of that time that the noise made by the falling key had not been heard. Now he turned the knob, and presently opened the door half an inch. Bit by bit he threw it back, and finally stepped into the room. He closed the door behind him as carefully as he had opened it, and even searched and found the key and locked the door again. Hurrying noiselessly across the room, he entered another, and finally passed into a narrow hallway. He carried the vapor gun in one hand now, and his electric torch in the other. At any instant, he knew, discovery might come. Some place in that hall a door might be opened, and light flood it. He was liable to stumble against one of the Black Star's men in the darkness. When he reached the other end of the hall, he stopped to listen again. Once more he heard voices coming as if from a distance, and decided that they came from some room on the second floor. He was bold enough to flash his torch once now, and discovered a rear staircase. To this he made his way, and up it and into a hallway on the second floor. Now he felt that he was on more dangerous ground. He could hear the voices plainly, and could locate the room from which they came. Toward the front of the hall a thin streak of light streamed from beneath a door. He managed to slip into the room adjoining that from which the light came. After listening for some time there, he flashed his torch again. The room was large, bare, dusty. On one side were two windows, the panes filmed with dirt. On the opposite side from which he had entered was another door, with some old curtains hanging before it. He crept across to this door, careful that the boards of the floor did not creak with his steps. He bent and peered through a keyhole into the room beyond. He did not chuckle now, for a chuckle might have meant disaster, but he did smile, and the expression on his face was one of lively satisfaction. He had arrived at an opportune moment. Caution remained with him, however. He hurried back across the room and locked the door with the key from his pocket. Then he journeyed to one of the windows and made sure that it was unlocked and that from it a man easily could drop to the ground. That done, he went back to the keyhole again and bent down to watch. As he took up his position, a deep voice came from the other room, a voice that seemed to be issuing orders, in a tone that meant the speaker generally had his orders obeyed instantly. "All ready now. Bring those two back to earth, and we'll have the show," the voice said. "Number 10, get out of the house and down to the river, and see that everything is prepared. It is now 9:30 o'clock, and we want to leave about 11. End of chapter 26. Recording by Roger Moline. Chapter 27 of The Black Star by Johnston McCulley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Roger Moline. Chapter 27 In Black Star's Hands. The man who peered through the keyhole saw a large room, furnished lavishly. The furniture was massive and antique. The rugs on the floor were valuable. Tapestries of rare worth were there. Cut glass was on a heavy buffet at one side of the room. An antique lamp standing near the center of the room shed an uncertain yellow light that made some things look grotesque and others fantastic. At the end of a long table and beside this lamp stood the Black Star, his robe and hood and mask in place, and the star of flaming jet flashing on the hood. Behind him was the blackboard upon which he wrote orders to those of his band not enough trusted to hear his voice. To one side were 6 members of the band, each dressed in black robe and mask. On 2 chairs a short distance in front of him, their hands and feet bound and their mouths gagged, were the 2 prisoners of the roadster. As the man of mystery watched, one of the Black Star's followers approached the chairs, and for an instant he held a small sponge beneath the nostrils of each of the 2 men. He stepped back near the others. A moment passed, and then Muggs groaned and opened his eyes. Those eyes seemed to flash fire when he took in the scene. "Well, my dear Muggs, here we are again," the Black Star said, laughing a little. "You regain consciousness a second sooner than Mr. Verbeck, as I have noticed before. That, I presume, is because you are a tougher specimen of humanity." You... Muggs stammered. "What's this? Your gag has slipped? That is well, for I was about to have it removed anyway. So you can talk, huh?" Muggs waved his head from side to side and caused the gag to slip again. "I'd talk to you with my fists if I had the chance," Muggs said. "There you go again. Always violence. I have wondered many times how Mr. Verbeck can put up with you. Ah, Mr. Verbeck is in the land of the conscious again, I perceive." Muggs turned his head and looked at the man beside him. Then he faced the Black Star again. "Them ropes on his arms are too tight, and that gag's choking him," Muggs complained. "You treat me rough if you want, but you treat my boss decent, or I'll have something to say to you sometime." "You scarcely are in a position to threaten just now, Mr. Muggs," the Black Star replied, laughing. "However, Muggs, it is not my intention to cause Mr. Verbeck any great degree of physical discomfort. Mental discomfort, of course, is another thing." He made a motion, and one of his men hurried forward and removed the gag. He looked at the ropes too, but shook his head as he regained his former position at the Black Star's left. "There, Muggs, are you satisfied?" the Black Star asked. "Your beloved master has had his gag removed, and may talk or shriek to his heart's content. My man indicates, however, that the ropes are all right. You cannot tempt me, Muggs. Once or twice before you and Mr. Verbeck were able to unfasten your bonds. I want nothing like that to happen tonight." He walked around the end of the table and toward the two prisoners, and he laughed aloud as he looked down upon them. "Well, Roger Verbeck, here is the Black Star's new headquarters," he said. "You often have wished to see the place, I believe, so take a look. You still think you can match wits with the Black Star, eh? I have done as I have threatened. I have had you and Muggs abducted, and I am going to take you along tonight when we do our little trick, and then leave you unconscious on the spot for the city to laugh at. Aren't you about ready to admit that the Black Star is too crafty for you?" "Scarcely," came the reply in a firm voice. "Why, my men tell me it was like kidnapping babies to get you and Muggs tonight. It really was a shame to do it. So you are going to continue your efforts to capture me, huh?" "I am, certainly." Your voice almost has the note of fear in it. You do not seem as sure as you did the last time I had the pleasure of entertaining you for a few minutes." "A few minutes is right," Muggs put in. "You've got your dirty hands on us 3 times now, but you've never kept us longer than a few minutes. And you'll not keep us tonight." "I fear you err, my dear Muggs. I am taking no chances with you or your precious master tonight. As I live, Mr. Verbeck, your face appears changed. Your cheeks are somewhat thinner. That comes, I suppose, from living in continual fear of me. Let me see. It has been about 3 weeks since I informed you of my intention to abduct you and make you a laughingstock again. You've been worrying about it all that time, huh? Been fearing to sleep or eat or ride abroad? Small wonder your face is thinner and your voice expresses fatigue." "He's been off his feed," Muggs blurted out, "and he's had a bad cold. You needn't think me, or my boss either, would let anything you said throw a scare into us." "Indeed? Had a bad cold, huh? I truly am sorry I did not give you this little entertainment when you were in good physical condition. But everything is prepared, Mr. Verbeck, and also you neglected to inform me you had a cold and wanted to discontinue this fight until you were better." The Black Star laughed again, as at a good joke, and Muggs growled imprecations deep down in his throat, but the other man merely looked the Black Star straight in the eyes and remained silent. "I trust you understand the program, Mr. Verbeck," the master criminal went on, his laugh at an end. "It has been about 6 months since you made your foolish boast that you could capture me. You should know by this time that it is an impossibility. However, you have had some excellent fun trying it, and I have enjoyed the battle immensely. But now it must end. It is getting to be a bore." "Really?" "Exactly. You're a sportsman, I believe. I'll make a deal with you. If Roger Verbeck does not capture the Black Star within the next 24 hours, after being right here and seeing the Black Star's headquarters, and being taken by the Black Star to the scene of tonight's crime, then Roger Verbeck gives his word of honor that he'll stop his feeble attempt and not bother the Black Star more." "Roger Verbeck does nothing of the sort." "Still determined, huh? Very well. Then, Mr. Verbeck, we are going to take you and your man Muggs with us. We're going to give you a dose from a vapor gun and leave you where the crime is committed, as I said we'd do. We'll give the alarm ourselves and have the police find you two there unconscious. Then let the public laugh. I fancy you'll hear a howl go up for you to be ordered off the case. I'd not be surprised if you were hounded out of this town, which has been your home all your life. I think not. Which shall you do? Make the deal I proposed, or be made a public laughingstock again? I make no deals with a crook. And what's more, you're wasting your breath, Muggs put in. You leave my boss alone. He's about half sick. He's said 100 times that you'll get too fresh some day. Some day you'll overlook a bet, make a mistake, and then he'll get you. And I'll be right there, I hope, when the getting's got. You are a very boisterous man, Muggs, the master criminal said. You'd be very vicious, I imagine, under some circumstances. Please do not be so violent. I abhor violence. You're right. You'll abhor it if I ever get my hands on you proper, Muggs exclaimed. The Black Star brought the palms of his hands together sharply. Enough of this chatter, he commanded. We have scant time before leaving here for the scene of the evening's festivities. You have decided, Mr. Verbeck, to be made a laughingstock? Very well. And where is this to take place? Came the question. Ah! Roger Verbeck thinks I fear to tell him in advance, does he? Why, sir, I'll even tell you every detail of the proposed crime, if you wish. You are most certainly my prisoner, and cannot warn the police, and could you, it would avail those stupid police nothing. One could steal the buttons off their uniforms, and they'd not know it until the next day. I'm listening. Such impatience! The Black Star exclaimed. Attend me closely, then, Mr. Verbeck. You also, Muggs. Little good it'll do you. It is my intention tonight to reap a harvest of some $300,000 in money and securities. Quite ambitious, that? Merely an ordinary task for the Black Star, I assure you. You're the original shrinkin' onion, Muggs declared. Silence, please, while I explain. The money and securities I mentioned are in the vaults of the National Trust Company. Those vaults are impregnable, it is said. This is a joke, of course. With us it will be as easy to get that fortune as it would be to purchase a new cravat. You're some modest violet, said Muggs. Keep quiet, Muggs, and hear the plans, the Black Star said, his eyes glittering through his mask. Within the past 2 months there has been formed in the city a new lodge called the Knights of Certainty. When one understands things, that title is rather a good joke. Many good men have heard of the order and wondered why someone did not ask them to join, I presume. The membership was strictly limited. Members of my own band formed the lodge. And you're the supreme boss crook, Muggs said. Another remark, Muggs, and you'll get the vapor gun. Mr. Verbeck, you'd better warn your man to remain silent. The Black Star evidently was getting angry. Muggs turned his head and found his fellow prisoner indicating that he was to be quiet. Muggs obeyed. It would be a difficult task to get into a meeting of the Knights of Certainty, the Black Star went on. We're mighty particular who sees things. I may mention that, from the moment we hired our hall and put in furniture, the room has been under close guard, one of our own men even doing the janitor work. This hall is on the third floor of the American Building, adjoining the National Trust Company. We have been making our preparations nightly, of course, working from our hall. Some excellent carpenter and mechanical work has been done, and now, when we wish, we have merely to pass through a wall to a stairway, and then make our way over a trail we have prepared to the vaults of the bank and loot them. Everything is prepared, I assure you. At this moment my men are in the uniforms of the watchmen, and doing their work. There will be no one to molest us. The vault locks have been fixed so that a few turns of the knobs will unlock them, and yet an expert would swear that time locks and other protections are in perfect working order. It has taken us some time to get this state of affairs prepared, but the reward will be well worth our trouble. The bank received a heavy gold shipment 2 weeks ago. Negotiable securities are piled in the vaults. The bank, in addition, always carries a heavy cash balance, for it has numerous branches and small affiliated banks. Yes, I fancy we will be well repaid for the work we have put on it." "If you get the stuff," said Muggs. The Black Star whirled toward him, and one of his men stepped forward, but the master criminal decided to let the remark pass. He walked to the head of the table and glanced at his watch. "We start in half an hour," he said. "Number 6, go down to the river and inform Number 10 to be ready to get away instantly." Once more he faced his prisoners. "How do you like my new headquarters?" he asked. "Only a few chosen and trusted men of mine come here. This is a ramshackle old house, but I have 3 rooms fixed up comfortably, and there are things of value in it, believe me. I find it advisable to dispose of loot slowly. I'd hate to flood the market and lower prices." He laughed again, and once more turned toward his men. For a moment he conversed with them in whispers, ignoring his prisoners. A bell tinkled presently. The Black Star touched a button on the end of the table, and a few seconds later the man who had been sent away returned. "Everything ready, Chief," he reported in a low tone. "Ah! Number 4, telephone Maine 5782. Ask for Gregg, and say that Mr. Stewart will have 4 cases of eggs tomorrow. That will tell those at the other end that we are starting." The man designated moved swiftly across the room to the telephone and sent the message. The Black Star waved a hand, and another man approached the 2 prisoners, a vapor gun in his hand. They twisted and turned in their bonds, but the gun did its work. The Black Star laughed again as their heads fell forward. "Clever, Mr. Verbeck, and clever, Mr. Muggs," he said. "Their attempts to capture me are childish, to say the least. Get ready now, for we must be off." The men removed their robes and masks and put on overcoats and soft hats. The Black Star took off his robe, but his hood and mask remained in place, and the overcoat he donned had a wide collar that, when turned up, effectually hid his face. No one, without looking at him squarely under a bright light, could have seen the mask. The master criminal waved his hand, and his men picked up the 2 unconscious prisoners. He led the way, and they followed, and the last man out turned off the light. Their steps sounded in the front hallway, the door latch clicked, they were gone. The man who had been watching all this through the keyhole chuckled aloud now, and presently he opened the door with his key and slipped into the headquarters room. There he stood for some minutes to listen, for he wanted to be sure that he was alone in the house, and then he crossed the room to the telephone, took down the receiver, and called a number in a soft voice. The number was that of police headquarters. End of chapter 27. Recording by Roger Moline. Chapter 28 of The Black Star by Johnston McCulley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Roger Moline. Chapter 28. The Police Launch. Down on the bank of the river, a speedy launch was concealed under overhanging trees. 2 men were waiting in it when the Black Star, his other followers, and the 2 prisoners arrived. The prisoners, still bound, were stretched on a robe in the bottom. The Black Star and his men got aboard, and the launch slipped almost noiselessly out into the stream and started down it toward the city. The craft showed its lights properly, but it kept away from all other vessels, and the men aboard crouched down low and spoke in whispers. In time the 2 prisoners groaned and opened their eyes, the effect of the vapor having worn off, and at a sign from the Black Star one of his men inspected bonds and gags, and made sure that they were secure. The Black Star did not want any slip this night with a fortune at stake. "Your attitude this evening puzzles me, Mr. Verbeck," the master criminal whispered in a sarcastic tone. "You do not seem to be your usual self. 3 or 4 times now I have had you as prisoner, and we have exchanged some conversation, and while I cannot say that I know you well, yet you do not seem the Verbeck of old. Apparently you have given up the fight. You are passive. Been worrying, huh? Afraid I'll abduct your fiancée, as I almost did once, and through her force you to join my band? Stop your silly attempt to capture me, Verbeck, and your worry will end. No? Very well, then." Muggs gurgled behind his gag at this baiting of his comrade, and the Black Star laughed at his ineffectual attempt to speak, and at the angry glint in his eyes. "Nor do you seem to be up to standard, my dear Muggs," he went on. "I am disgusted with you this evening. Here you have been in my power for a couple of hours, and have not made a violent move. Generally you manage to slip your ropes by some clever means. Losing your fighting spirit, are you?" Muggs gurgled again, and the Black Star laughed softly and turned away. "We do not go into a wharf," he told his men. "We will take no chances of the police being informed and in wait for us. We stop at a certain place and transfer to touring cars. Get those fantastic robes from the locker and dress Verbeck and Muggs in them. We'll mask them, too, and so, when we reach the city, if anyone gets inquisitive, we are merely initiating 2 gentlemen into the Knights of Certainty." They were halfway to the city now, and his men began carrying out his orders. Suddenly the engineer of the launch growled something, shut off the power, cut out all the lights, and let the craft drift. "Police launch!" he hissed over his shoulder. Up the river and directly at them rushed a high-powered craft that was hurling back the water from her bows. Her searchlight was sweeping the river. The Black Star growled orders, his men stretched beside him on the bottom, and the engineer hurled quantities of sacks over them. Then he snapped on the lights again and started the launch forward, slowly, for he would be able to escape suspicion that way better than if discovered by the searchlight and found to be drifting without lights burning. For a moment the searchlight rested on the launch, which continued on its course. The police craft swung in and headed directly for it. A hail came across the water. The launch was slowed down, and the police boat stopped almost alongside. "Who are you, and where are you going?" an officer demanded. "This is the launch Speedy," the engineer replied. I'm running to the fish market with a load of sacks. What's the matter?" "Seen any other launch?" the officer demanded. "Nope." "How far have you come?" "From the mouth of the river. Good fishing there now." "I'll come aboard and look you over," the officer said. The police boat started slowly and swung nearer. In that instant the Black Star's engineer acted. He threw on the power and dropped, for the wheel was locked. The screw churned the water and hurled a great wave at the police boat. Behind, the men in the police boat were shouting, and a fusillade of revolver shots spattered around the Black Star's craft. But the police found themselves at a disadvantage. The Black Star's launch was swifter, and the police boat was headed the wrong way and had to be turned. While the turn was being accomplished, the firing continued, and the searchlight kept the prey in sight, but that prey was gradually putting distance between itself and the boat behind. The Black Star's boat was 100 yards in the lead by the time the police launch had straightened out and taken up the chase in earnest. The grim race was on, with the police firing at times, and the searchlight always playing on the vessel ahead. The Black Star had crawled from beneath the sacks now, and was directing operations. "All the speed you have, and get around the bend," he ordered. "We can leave the boat and take to the touring cars. We'll be lost in the city before they can telephone headquarters or get cars and trail us." The bend in the stream was not far ahead now, and the master criminal issued further orders. The two prisoners were treated to shots from the vapor gun again. The siren of the launch shrieked a message to the men ahead waiting with the touring cars. Around the bend, and the launch dashed for the shore. As it was reached, the police boat came into view, its searchlight trying to pick up the quarry. The Black Star and his men tumbled out, carrying the prisoners. From the road a short distance away came the honking of an automobile horn. Then the searchlight struck them, and the police launch turned and headed for the shore. More flashes of flame split the darkness, and bullets whined through the trees and underbrush. But the Black Star and his men were in the dense woods now, and hurrying along a narrow path that led to the road. They reached the two waiting motor cars and tumbled in, and the automobile started toward the city. The police were just leaving their boat and rushing into the woods, flashing their pocket torches, their revolvers held ready, calling to one another. They reached the road in time to hear the roaring of two motors and to see two cars disappearing down the highway. They wasted another fusillade of shots, and then hurried back toward the boat. End of chapter 28. Recording by Roger Moline. Chapter 29 of The Black Star by Johnston McCulley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Roger Moline. Chapter 29. Black Star Takes a Trick. The Black Star rode in the first car with his two prisoners and 3 of his trusted men, and the others followed in the second car as close as safety would permit. Both chauffeurs got all the speed possible out of the machines they drove. The police had been left behind for the time being, but there was danger of them getting to a telephone in some way and sending an alarm to headquarters. If the Black Star's autos were headed off as they were entering the city, disaster might follow. If they could gain the city streets and separate, undoubtedly their chances for getting to the lodge hall unobserved would be excellent. The Black Star was not worrying about the police. He deemed it a coincidence that the launch had run upon him. He believed the officers had been looking for river thieves, and that they would continue to look for them. He did not think for a moment that the police in the launch were looking for the Black Star and members of his band. How could that be possible? How could the police know that this was the night the Black Star had chosen for a crime and that he would be coming up the river in a launch? "We'll be at the bridge in a few minutes," the master criminal's chauffeur warned. "The road curves up to the bridge," the Black Star replied. "I do not think it possible that word could have been sent ahead, but it is well to be prepared. Slow down as you reach the curve and shut off your lights. The car behind will do the same. We'll stop this side of the curve and investigate." On dashed the cars, and presently the Black Star's chauffeur decreased his speed, forcing the chauffeur behind to do the same. The lights of the two cars went out. They rolled along the road with scarcely any noise, and presently came to a stop. Here the road ran close to the river, and by getting from the car and walking 100 feet, the master criminal could look down at the bridge. He took one of his men with him and went to make his investigation. He saw at a glance what was happening. The police, it was evident, had reached a telephone. The bridge at the moment was swinging open. And when it was open it remained so, though there was no boat in sight to make the passage through. And as the master criminal watched, he saw the police launch darting up the river. Its searchlight flashed upon the bridge, and its siren bellowed. It turned toward the shore and touched. The police sprang out and ran up the bank. The Black Star could see them reach the floor of the bridge and run along it to the tender's shanty. Then they scattered, hiding among girders and along the bridge approach. Very clever," the Black Star said to his man. "There is only the one road, too. We drive at a furious pace on to the bridge, we see the draw open, and we stop, and the clever police spring out and make us all prisoners. Very clever, except that I anticipated it." "Maybe we could turn around and get back to our launch," his man suggested. "Fool! In the first place we'd lose valuable time, and then, when we did come up the river, we'd have to clash with the police boat again. Also, my brainy friend, if our launch is where we left it, you may be sure there is a police guard there waiting for us to return. If you happen to have any brains, try to use them." The Black Star's man gulped and kept silent. "Go back to the cars and have all the men come here, bringing Muggs and Verbeck," the master criminal ordered. The man obeyed. Within 2 minutes all were grouped around the Black Star, and the unconscious prisoners were on the ground at the foot of a tree. The Black Star explained their predicament. "You chauffeurs, get back in the cars, turn on the lights, and drive on to the bridge," he instructed. "When the police question you, simply say you have been out to that roadhouse on the river bank earlier this evening, which will be true, and not finding fares there, or prospects of any, are on your way back to the city. Admit you heard firing back on the road, and saw men rushing through the trees. Say you didn't stop because you were afraid of being held up. There have been several automobile holdups in that vicinity recently. And argue with the police as long as possible, while we do our part." The chauffeurs hurried away. They ran some risk, they knew. They might be put under arrest, but they had little fear of that. Both held licenses as public chauffeurs, and they had established the roadhouse alibi on the master criminal's orders. And, if held, the Black Star would see that they were bailed out, and then they'd simply jump their bail. "We're going through that bridge into the city, and we're going in the police launch," the Black Star told the others. "That'll be rather rubbing it in, but the police deserve it. I'll write a letter to the papers afterward telling just how we did it. There is only one man in the launch. We must seize it and make a quick getaway. Run under the bridge and straight up the river. We'll desert the police boat a short distance down the stream. I've arranged for 2 taxicabs to be there. I wasn't exactly sure where it would be best to leave our own launch, and I always prepare for emergencies." He led the way through the brush on the bank of the river. They had but a short distance to go, and they were directly opposite the police boat and about 100 feet from it when they heard the 2 automobiles run up on the bridge and stop at the command of a policeman. The Black Star was a wise general. He did not send all his men forward at once. Had he done that, the engineer of the launch would have been suspicious and instantly sounded an alarm. The master criminal selected one man, and had him walk boldly through the brush and down to the launch. In the semi-darkness, the engineer of the launch would believe him to be one of the plainclothesmen returning with orders. The Black Star's man was within a dozen feet of the boat before the engineer was aware of his approach, for he was busy with the searchlight. He turned when he heard the man splashing through the mud at the edge of the river, and before he could ask a question, he received a shot from a vapor gun and collapsed in the bottom of the boat, unconscious. The searchlight had been playing on the bridge approach. The Black Star's man swerved it aside for a moment, and then back into position, thus notifying his master that his work had been accomplished. Down through the brush crept the Black Star and his men, carrying their 2 prisoners. They reached the launch and boarded it, and the master criminal's engineer hurried to his machinery. The police engineer had been tossed out on the shore. But the escape was not to be made without trouble. There was a captain in charge of the police squad who thought quickly. When the 2 empty automobiles reached the bridge, and the questioning of the chauffeurs began, this captain ordered half his men to return to the launch and go back up the river to look for traces of their quarry. They broke through the brush just as the launch's engineer was put on the shore. The mere sight of men aboard the launch was enough to tell the police what had occurred. They charged forward, shooting wildly and yelling alarms to their companions up on the bridge. Bullets smashed into the sides of the craft as it backed slowly away from the shore. The engineer was doing his best, but he could not turn and put on speed until safely away from the shallows. It was a perilous moment for the Black Star and his men. The criminals returned the fire, but made no attempt to hit their targets, for the master's crook's orders always stood against inflicting wounds or causing death unless it was absolutely necessary. Crouching in the bottom of the launch, they waited for the engineer to back out into the stream. More police were hurrying down from the bridge, and soon would be firing at the launch. And they would be able to keep up their volleys until the launch was some distance away, endangering the Black Star and his men and prisoners every moment of the time. But the master criminal, it appeared, though he pretended to abhor all violence, was no physical coward. He sprang to his feet, away from the protection of the bulwarks, and jumped forward to the searchlight. While bullets rained around him, he reached the light and turned it. It flashed straight into the faces of the foes on the shore, blinding them at that short range, making them easy targets, and rendering them incapable of aiming at the men in the launch. Some continued firing in the path of light. Others sprang for cover in the brush, expecting the men in the boat to fire a volley. The laugh of the Black Star rang out. He continued playing the light on them. The launch was out in the stream now and turning. A moment later the engineer gave her the maximum amount of speed, and she dashed beneath the bridge and toward the city. "Too bad our prisoners could not have been conscious and enjoyed this little battle," he told his men. "Really, Muggs and Verbeck are not in the thick of it at all tonight. Generally they cause a part of the trouble, but tonight all our trouble has come from others." He chuckled as if well pleased with himself. "Some joke this, stealing the enemy's boat," he observed. End of chapter 29. Recording by Roger Moline. Chapter 30 of The Black Star by Johnston McCulley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Roger Moline. Chapter 30. Muggs in Action. For 15 minutes they ran in silence, and then the Black Star went forward and stood beside the engineer. "Put in at the alley between National and Washington Streets," he ordered. "Out with your lights and make as little noise as possible. The 2 taxicabs should be waiting at the end of the alley. Get ready, men, and pick up Verbeck and Muggs. We don't want to lose any more time. We've lost enough already." He was not chuckling now. He spoke in a stern voice, and his men knew that the Black Star was thinking only of the big planned crime now, of getting the money and securities from the vault of the National Trust Company and removing the fortune to his headquarters. Then the band would scatter as usual, and in the morning the police would discover that the lodge hall of the Knights of Certainty had been a crook's workshop and the robbery made possible because of it, but they would make the discovery too late, as usual. They would find little black stars pasted in the lodge hall and on the vaults, and none of the members of the Knights of Certainty would be seen again. The Black Star and his men would leave behind a couple of $100 worth of furniture, and take away between $200,000 and $300,000 in coin and negotiable securities. And the next blow perhaps would be struck in a different section of the city, and at an unexpected moment, as usual. The lights of the launch went out, and her speed was cut down until she scarcely crept through the water. Closer and closer she slipped to the shore, inside the shadows of large warehouses. She passed the end of a street, went in closer, and came finally to the alley. Silently the men lashed her to piling there. The 2 taxicabs were waiting, and the transfer to them took but a few minutes. With curtains up, they crept to the mouth of the alley, turned into a street, and sped along it toward the business district. There was nothing unusual in the appearance of the taxicabs. A score of police officers would have glanced at them once and then turned away. Repeatedly they were held up at crossings by the theater and café crowds passing. They were caught in traffic jams, but their chauffeurs puffed at cigarettes and waited nonchalantly until they could go ahead. They reached the front of the building where the Knights of Certainty had their hall, but did not stop there. They went into the alley and pulled up at a little side door. One of the men got out, rapped on the door, and gave a password when a slot in it was opened. The Black Star and his men got out, glanced around, carried their prisoners from the cabs, and went into the building. The door was closed again, the 2 taxicabs drove away. An elevator made 2 trips to the 3rd floor, and the Black Star and his men entered the lodge hall. Guards took up the positions that had been assigned to them. The doors were bolted securely, the windows had been fitted with opaque glass and heavy curtains. "Well, here we are," the Black Star said. "Mask, gentlemen. Now bring our prisoners back to life, and we'll let them see how easy it is to make money." While his orders were being obeyed, the master criminal went to one of the walls and pressed against a certain spot there. A section of the wall swung out, and in the aperture a masked man stood. "Everything all right?" the Black Star asked. "All safe, sir," came the reply. "The watchman?" "Not a hitch there, sir. They are all unconscious, and our men in their places. We have reported regular for 4 hours, and not a suspicion at headquarters, or they'd have investigated before this. The patrolman on the beat even looked in at a window once and waved at our man on the first floor." "Excellent," the Black Star said, rubbing his hands in satisfaction. He walked back to the end of the room. His prisoners were revived now, and had been placed side by side in chairs before one of the curtained windows in the rear of the hall. "Ah, Mr. Verbeck and Mr. Muggs," the master criminal smirked. "You are conscious again, then? 'Twas a pity you didn't see the little fight we had with the police. I'd tell you all about it, but we haven't the time to spare, and you can read about it in tomorrow's papers. Well, here you are in the Hall of the Knights of Certainty. You see the aperture in the wall? My mechanics have arranged a passageway between the walls of the two buildings. We have a sort of glorified dumbwaiter, and by its use can descend to the first floor of the National Trust Company's building. Simple, huh? I regret I cannot explain the method we are going to use to get into the burglar-proof vaults. Did it become public property, the manufacturers might invent some means of counteracting it. Kindly sit still, gentlemen, while I have my men prepare the way." He deliberately turned his back and walked to the center of the hall again and called his men to him, all except the guards near the doors. He issued instructions, and 2 men hurried to the aperture in the wall and disappeared. The Black Star was the commanding general now, and his followers were eager to obey. For 15 minutes, perhaps, he paced the floor, glancing at his prisoners now and then, and often stopping to issue some whispered instruction. Then one of the men he had sent below returned. "All ready, sir," he reported. "The vaults are opened?" the Black Star asked. "Yes, sir, and every strong box. All you have to do is take out the swag, sir." "The suitcases are there and ready?" "Yes, sir." "2 of you carry Mr. Verbeck to the dumbwaiter, and we'll descend with him," the master criminal commanded. "Sorry I cannot take you at the same time, my dear Muggs, but the capacity of our dumbwaiter is limited. I'll have you taken below before we are through, though. In the meantime, sit calmly on your chair." He laughed as he turned toward the aperture in the wall, laughed again as 2 of his men carried the bound and gagged prisoner as if he had been a log of wood, and chuckled as he saw the anger flashing in Muggs's eyes. The Black Star, his helpless prisoner, and his 2 men disappeared, and the aperture in the wall was closed. Those who remained glanced at Muggs, but did not approach him, and made no offer to taunt him. They left that to the Black Star. All except the guards at the 2 doors and one who peered through a slit in the curtain at a front window, gathered in the middle of the room and spoke in whispers. Muggs tugged at his bonds for the 100th time, and realized that he had been bound well. There was no hope of slipping from these ropes. Here was no broken glass upon which he could saw the ropes, as Roger Verbeck had done once. Nor could he manage to get his fingers into a hip pocket and extract a knife that opened with a touch of the thumb, and cut his bonds with that, as he had done once before when in the Black Star's hands. Back at the master criminal's headquarters, he had been searched and his knife taken from him. He racked his brain for an idea that would lead to release, and could think of none. On the first floor of the adjoining building, he guessed, the Black Star and his men were filling suitcases with the wealth of the National Trust Company, and a helpless and raging prisoner was being forced to watch the crime and endure the taunts of the Black Star at the same time. If only he could be free and have a good automatic in his hand. He glanced at the Black Star's men again. They were not even looking in his direction. They knew well, he supposed, that he could not make a move. He could only sit in the chair against the curtained rear window and look straight ahead, absolutely helpless. He imagined that he could hear a slight noise outside the window, but it was not repeated. If he could have seen, he would have noticed that the point of a sharp knife pierced the heavy curtain directly behind him, and where none in the room could see. Working slowly, cutting an inch at a time, that knife made a slit half a foot long. Then Muggs heard the slightest suggestion of a whisper. "Muggs, we're here to help, but must move carefully. I'm going to cut your ropes and slip you a gun. Hold your arms tight so the ropes won't fall away until you're ready. Steady now." Muggs might have shrieked his happiness had not the gag prevented. He didn't pretend to know the owner of the voice, and he didn't care much, so that it was a friend. One thing he did know: it was not the voice of Roger Verbeck. And it was not the voice of old Detective Riley, who had helped Muggs and Verbeck several times in their effort to take the Black Star. It was a strange voice, but welcome for all that. Muggs felt a knife sawing at the ropes that bound his wrists together behind him. He caught the ends as the ropes were severed, and held them so that they would not drop away and alarm the Black Star's men before his feet were free. The knife was working on the ropes that bound his feet now. It was slow and tedious work, and at times the knife was still. Finally Muggs felt the last rope give, and he heard the whisper again. "I'm going to slip you an automatic. Stick 'em all up and hold 'em while we break in behind you. If we make a false move, we'll lose. Is the Black Star still below? Wiggle your fingers if he is." Muggs wiggled his fingers by way of answer, and almost immediately he felt the butt of an automatic pressed against his palm. "Now," the voice whispered. None of the criminals were facing Muggs. He stretched his arms and legs once to restore circulation, and then sprang from his chair. "Hands up!" he shrieked, and leveled the automatic. Every man in the room whirled to face him at that command. One reached for a weapon, and Muggs shot over his head. Behind him the window was shattered, and there was a sudden commotion as half a dozen uniformed policemen, a lieutenant at their head, tumbled into the lodge hall with guns held ready. "Keep 'em up!" the lieutenant warned. Another of the Black Star's men reached for a gun, and the sergeant dropped him. Another darted quickly across the room, and the bullet that went in his direction missed its mark. He reached the wall and the light switch. The lights went out. End of chapter 30. Recording by Roger Moline. Chapter 31 of The Black Star by Johnston McCulley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Roger Moline. Chapter 31 In the Bank. The forces were about even, and these men of the Black Star's organization, whom he had taken into his inner circle, and, in a measure, into his confidence, could be expected to put up a brave fight to save themselves and their master from capture or death. They knew how the public regarded the Black Star and his band. They knew what a jury would do to any one of them who stood in the prisoner's dock, and that the judge would give the limit of imprisonment to any declared guilty. So, as the lights went out, there came a scattered volley from the criminals, who had darted to different parts of the lodge hall. Muggs and most of the policemen, however, anticipating that volley, had thrown themselves flat on the floor, and they fired at the flashes and changed their positions quickly. Again volleys were exchanged, and shrieks of pain told that some of the bullets had found human marks. The lieutenant was bellowing his commands, urging his men to guard doors and windows. In the darkness it was impossible to tell policeman from criminal, and both sides ceased firing. There came a rush, and some of the Black Star's men reached the door that opened into the hall and threw it open. They were met by a stream of light from the corridor, and saw more policemen standing there awaiting them, their weapons held ready. There was no escape that way. The light made it possible for the police to shoot again, and 2 of the criminals went to the floor badly wounded. Others ran to the front windows, but there was no way of escape there, for it was 3 stories to the ground. Nor could they reach the rear windows and fire escape, for the police were on guard there. They were cornered in the lodge hall and knew it. To each of them came the thought that prison was better than death, for no murder was charged against the Black Star's band. And they had faith in their master and his organization. Arrest did not mean prison necessarily. "Throw down them guns, or take it," the lieutenant commanded. One of the Black Star's lieutenants groaned, threw down his gun, and put up his hands. Then the others followed his example. They couldn't understand how the police happened to be there. The Black Star had almost always managed to lead them astray before. They began wondering how it fared with the Black Star and the others on the floor below. "Once too often this gang has tried to put over something," the lieutenant said as his men snapped handcuffs on the crestfallen criminals. "We've got you this time, and you'll do a long stretch each." "We was only holdin' a meetin'," one of the men replied. "Yeah, I know all about that meetin'. Masks on your faces, and the Black Star and some more down in the bank, and Muggs bound and gagged in a chair, and you was only holdin' a meetin'. Down to the wagon you go now, and straight to the hoosgow." Muggs was not listening to this tirade of the lieutenant's. No sooner had he seen that the battle was over than he had raced across the hall to the wall where the Black Star had touched a hidden button and caused an aperture to show there. He pressed the wall frantically, but with no result. He covered every square inch of it near where he had seen the Black Star put his hand, but no opening appeared. "Needn't waste time there, Muggs, if you want to get to that Verbeck man of yours," he heard the sergeant saying. "There's some trick about it, of course, or it wouldn't belong to the Black Star. We were outside the window on the fire escape, and saw him open that, and heard what he said. So we'll just guard this end here, in case they should open it and try to come up. The lower floor is guarded too, and they'll be mixing things there in a minute. They're waiting until the Black Star gets his hands on some money and stuff. We want to get him with the goods, see? Men all around the block, too. A mouse couldn't get away. We've got him this time." "How'd you know?" Muggs demanded. "Don't ask me. Some tip to the chief, and it sure was a correct tip. 2/3 of the night relief is scattered around this block right now. Here's where we clean up. By George, I'm sorry you and Verbeck didn't do it." "Didn't we?" Muggs snarled. "You wouldn't have done much, I guess, bound and gagged the way you were. Just been left here for another joke. Nope, the police get the credit for this. The police and whoever tipped this off. One of the Black Star's men did it, I suppose. Someone that was sore at him for something." "Guess again," Muggs snarled. He didn't fancy this belittling of Roger Verbeck by a lieutenant of police. He turned and hurried across the hall and into the corridor, and sped down the stairs. He wanted to get around to the other side of the block and see what was transpiring in the National Trust Company's building. He had forgotten the fantastic robe in which the Black Star had dressed him, and the laughter of one of the policemen in the hall brought it to mind. Muggs tore the robe off and growled his imprecations, and ran on as the policeman laughed again. At the entrance to the building, an officer held him up with leveled weapon, not being sure of his identity. Muggs lost time until another lieutenant appeared who knew him and ordered his release. He reached the street, sprinted for the corner, darted around it, and reached the front of the bank. Everything seemed quiet there. Half a dozen policemen were standing on the sidewalk, and there seemed no commotion inside. "Why don't you get in? Why don't you do something?" Muggs wanted to know. "Standing here like dummies that ain't got—" "Easy there, man," one of them replied. "We're doing something all right. You just wait here with us until we get the signal." "Wait nothin'!" Muggs exclaimed. "I'm going." "Wait, Muggs. We know the Black Star is in there and what he's doing, and we know he's got Verbeck in there. Take it easy. We've got it planned, and we'll get him with the goods." "You'll let him get away with half of what's in the vaults, that's what you'll do," Muggs stormed. "I've seen that gent work before. You just let me get in there. I've got a score or two to settle with him." "You'll have to wait." He was interrupted by the blast of a whistle. Instantly the officers were active. They sprang to the big double doors of the bank and crashed them open and tumbled inside. Others who came running took up their stations outside to watch every exit. Muggs was the second man through the front door. It was dark inside, save where some light came through the windows from the street. The police flashed their torches and charged through the main room and into the office section. They tumbled over low partitions and scrambled over tables and desks and chairs, working their way back of the cages toward the vaults. There had been officers stationed inside the building before the Black Star and his men arrived to begin operations, and they were in front of the charge. It had been the chief of police who had given the signal on the whistle. Through a glass partition he had watched proceedings until what he judged was the right moment to act. He was eager to catch the master criminal with loot in his hands, to get such evidence that there would be no possibility of a mistrial or acquittal. There was the sound of crashing glass as the partitions went down. There was a loud command for the Black Star and his men to throw up their hands and surrender. There came a deafening crash, and a cloud of vapor rolled toward the police. Some inhaled it and fell. Others, guessing what it meant, tried to hold breath until it passed, though it half blinded them and made their eyes smart and torrents of tears run from them. Over the noise and confusion rang the mocking laugh of the Black Star. Through the gas cloud they could see him retreating, shielding himself with the body of his bound and gagged prisoner. 3 men who retreated before him carried 2 heavy suitcases between them. Shots rang out, but none fell. Those of the police who had not been rendered unconscious by the gas bomb charged again. They saw the Black Star back into a little side corridor, saw him hesitate a moment by the wall, put his hand against it, and saw an opening appear. Through this opening his men darted. He stepped into it himself, still using his prisoner as a shield. Then the opening closed. "We've got him! Got him!" the chief cried. "Our men are watching the top of that between-the-walls business he built, and we are watching the bottom. He can't get out. He'll give up or he'll stay there and starve. And if he doesn't give up mighty quick, we'll go in after him." Muggs grasped the chief by the arm and opened his mouth to speak, but the chief was quicker. "I know, Muggs," he said. "The scoundrel's got Verbeck in there. But we'll get him, and I don't think he'll hurt Verbeck." End of Chapter 31. Recording by Roger Moline. Chapter 32 of The Black Star by Johnston McCulley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Roger Moline. Chapter 32. A Narrow Escape. When the Black Star had entered the aperture in the lodge hall, and the panel closed behind him, he flashed his electric torch around the interior of a space about 5 feet long and 3 wide. "Notice our ingenuity, Mr. Verbeck," he said. "Here we have constructed, as I remarked, a sort of dumbwaiter between the walls of the two buildings. It took considerable time, and great care was necessary, but the job will be profitable for all that. Every bit of material had to be smuggled into the lodge hall, but we did it without the stupid police suspecting anything was wrong. I am sorry that I cannot remove your mask and gag and discuss this bit of work with you, but you might shriek and call down our foes. Kindly give me your close attention now. You see this small cable running through the corner? I pull on it like this, similar to the old-fashioned elevators, you see? And down we go." The little box arrangement crept downward slowly as the Black Star chuckled his satisfaction. There was not the slightest noise. The holes even had been greased so the cable would slip through silently. Inch by inch the box descended. It was insufferably hot, and the air was bad. None spoke a word until the descent of the box stopped, and then the Black Star turned to his prisoner again. "We are at the bottom," he said. "You see this small button here? It is connected with an electric light signal that we installed, and when I press it a certain number of times, it conveys a meaning to one of my men in the bank. The little bulb light, I assure you, is cunningly hidden. You see, I am prepared for everything, Mr. Verbeck. Perhaps that is why I am so successful." He reached out and pressed the button. There was a wait of half a minute, and then a green bulb glowed in the top of the box. "Ah, the coast is clear," the Black Star said. "We are about to take a fortune in money and securities from the strongest bank in the city, Mr. Verbeck, from a bank that boasts its vaults cannot be opened by burglars." The Black Star chuckled again, and then pressed against the wall. An opening showed before them, and one of the Black Star's men stood just outside, masked. "All ready, sir," he reported. "The suitcases are on the table before the vault's door, and you have only to open that door and step inside." "The watchmen are on duty?" "In front on the 2 upper floors, sir, and in the rear on this floor at this time. He has to punch his report box there in 10 minutes." "Guard the corridor, then. I want only the 3 men with me in the vault room. Should there be trouble, use the back exit, and leave this for me and those working with me." He stepped out as he ceased speaking, and the men behind him carried the prisoner between them, as they had on the floor above. They were in a narrow side corridor that ran from the offices to an alley entrance, an entrance used by directors when they attended a meeting, and by bank officials when they desired to get out of the building without seeing some undesirable. Along this narrow corridor they walked slowly, bending low when they came to a place where light came through the windows from the street. They opened a door and passed through an office, opened another door, and were in the vault room. "Put Mr. Verbeck in that chair at the end of the table and facing the door of the vault," the Black Star whispered to his men. I want him to have the privilege of watching operations. Then, when we are done, we'll pin a nice little note to his breast, put him to sleep, go away, and telephone the stupid police to come here and find him. And then the public can have a laugh." His men obeyed him, and the Black Star turned to the door of the vault. He chuckled again as he reached a hand forward, grasped the handle, and swung the heavy door open. He looked back at his prisoner and waved a hand in derision, and then stepped into the vault. The others could see his torch flash, and presently he came out. "A very good haul, I imagine," he announced, and began piling packages of banknotes into one of the suitcases. "I am gathering the big bills. Haven't time to bother with such things as 5s and 10s at first. Perhaps, if we have time, I'll take a few packages for the men. Now for some more." 6 trips he made into the vault, and each time he came out with his arms filled with bundles of banknotes, which he put into the suitcase. On the 7th trip he carried 2 bags of gold coins, and put one in the first suitcase and locked it, and then threw the second sack in a corner of the second suitcase. Securities were the next things he went after. He filled the second suitcase with bonds, even stopping to flash his torch over them and discard those of small value, or such as would not be easily negotiable. "You see how simple it is, Mr. Verbeck, when a man with brains plans things?" he asked. "Quite a bit of wealth here, what? More than many ordinary men would earn during their lifetimes. And I take it as an evening's diversion, after some weeks of preparation, of course, and make it, instead of a lifetime's work, only one bit of work out of many good ones. I am going to make one more trip. I have heard of a certain diamond necklace that is kept in this vault, and I want it, if it can be found quickly. If I do not get it tonight, I'll have to rob this place again, and I have made it a rule heretofore never to strike twice in the same place." Even his own men marveled at the man's composure. Here he was robbing the strongest financial institution in the city, entering a vault considered impregnable, and without showing the slightest nervousness. Apparently he was in no great hurry to get away. He might have been a man in his own home, showing his friends treasures taken from a private safe. Then came the sound of a distant shot, the sound of breaking glass, a man's shriek. The Black Star hurried from the vault and stood listening, and the faint light from the street showed that there was some concern in his countenance. One of the watchmen came running in from the corridor. "The red signal!" he exclaimed. "The signal from the lodge hall!" "Quietly, quietly, my man," the master criminal said. "Nothing ever is gained by getting into a sweat when quick thinking is necessary. Give the signal and go out the rear way, all of you." "But you, sir?" "I'll take care of myself. Go! Undoubtedly those fools upstairs are frightened at nothing." But a fusillade of shots from the lodge hall above gave the lie to his words. "Something appears to be wrong," he said. "I suppose we may as well get out of here and into our between-the-walls box. Pick up the suitcases, men. I am sure I don't imagine what has happened. There is no way in which the police could have been informed. If you were not my prisoner now, Mr. Verbeck, but you are, and so is Muggs. I was going to bring Muggs down here and leave him with you, but he'll have to miss this share of the fun, I think. One moment, Mr. Verbeck, until I decorate your breast with a sarcastic note." He reached in his pocket and brought forth the note he had prepared, and stepped toward the prisoner, reaching to his lapel for a pin. "We'd better hurry," one of his men suggested. "Are you afraid, when I am here beside you?" the Black Star demanded. "Such a man has no place in an organization like mine." "I'm afraid for you, sir, that's all." "Your solicitude for my welfare overwhelms me. Start on, my man, and I'll be with you almost instantly." The three men started toward the door with the suitcases. The Black Star bent forward to pin the note on the breast of the man before him. And then the chief's whistle came. With the crashing in of the front door of the bank, the Black Star was a changed man. He grasped his prisoner by the shoulders, jerked him from the chair, and dragged him across the room to the office door. Through the offices, police poured in upon him. His hand dived into his pocket and came forth holding a round object about the size of a tennis ball. He hurled it on the floor in front of the advancing foes. There was a roar as the bomb struck, a hiss as the cloud of vapor spread. The Black Star laughed mockingly and backed toward the wall, shielding himself behind his helpless prisoner's body. He touched the wall, and the opening appeared. He went in, still carrying his prisoner, and in the little box he laughed again, aloud, and tugged at the cable. "Quite a bit of excitement, Mr. Verbeck," he observed. "But here we are, safe and sound, and with the suitcases filled with loot. Now I wonder what brought those police down upon us. I suppose I'll have to go through my organization and ask a few questions. And if there is such a thing as a traitor— Ha!" He tugged at the cable again, and the box ascended. "Listen to the poor fools pounding on the wall," he exclaimed. "They will have difficulty, I imagine, finding how that opening is caused. You notice, my dear Mr. Verbeck, that when I opened it either above or below, I pressed the wall with my hand. That is merely a trick, should someone be observing too closely. As I do that, I touch the real spring with the toe of my shoe. Men can press with their hands all day and not find it." End of chapter 32. Recording by Roger Moline. Chapter 33 of The Black Star by Johnston McCulley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Roger Moline. Chapter 33. Puzzled Police. As he ceased speaking, the Black Star turned suddenly and gave his prisoner a shot from the vapor gun. His own men evidently had guessed what was coming, for they turned their faces away, and each held a small sponge to his nostrils, for in that close space the vapor seemed twice as heavy. "Quick now," the master criminal instructed his men. "I don't know how it happens that the police came down on us, but they're here, and I suppose the block is surrounded. We can't go up and we can't go down, yet. The men upstairs must have been overcome, since the fighting has stopped and the bank is full of police, so we'll try the halfway station." He tugged at the cable and the car stopped. He flashed his torch on the wall and then pulled the cable again and forced the car to ascend as slowly as possible, while he looked closely at the wall. "Here's the scratch we made," he said finally, and stopped the box. He pressed against the wall, and a new aperture showed. "In with you," he instructed, "and don't forget the loot." The three men stepped past him and into a tiny room that had been constructed between the walls, halfway from the first floor to the third. The Black Star followed, turned to tug at the cable and send the box to the top of the shaft, and then closed the opening and turned to face his three men and his unconscious prisoner. "Here we are," he said. "Speak in whispers now, and we'll be all right. We have some ventilation here, and you may smoke if you wish. This little room was connected with an air shaft in the building, you'll remember. You see what forethought does? I had this constructed just for such an emergency. The percentage of chance was against it ever being needed, but I thought it better to take no chance, and you see what it has meant. That is why I always win. I prepare for every possible contingency. The police at that moment were trying it. Down below, the chief was ordering his men to hammer through the wall, since they were unable to find the spring that released the panel. Those above had been unsuccessful in their search for the spring, too, and both above and below officers were smashing at the wall with axes, trying to cut their way through. Down in the bank, Muggs was raging. "I knew you'd let him get away," he cried. "I knew it." "We've got him trapped," the chief answered. "How do you know it? Ain't you got some respect for the Black Star's schemes by this time?" "We'll get him. You're worrying about Verbeck, that's all. I don't think he'll hurt your boss." "The Black Star'll get out some way." "Take it easy, Muggs," the chief advised. "We've got the entire block surrounded. Every door and window is being watched. Why, I've even got men watching the sewer connections. Not a rat could get out of this block without being seen and caught." "Yeah? We had him surrounded in a house once out on the river, and didn't he get to the roof and streak it away in an airplane?" "Well, you may be sure he hasn't any plane on the roof of this building, Muggs. He couldn't have driven it here and landed. It'd have been smashed to bits, and besides, someone would have heard or seen him. An airplane makes a noise, and he didn't have any on the roof at supper time because one of the watchmen we found bound and gagged lives up there, and he just told me he'd seen nothing suspicious. We've got him in a trap, I tell you." The wall crashed in, and the men fell back, half expecting to face a fight with the Black Star and his men. But their torches showed them a dark shaft running up between the walls, and a cable in one corner of it, and that was all. They cleared away the debris. Up in the lodge hall, the other policemen smashed through the wall, too, and sent a shower of bricks and plaster down. Through the shaft they held conversation with those below. "That box business is up here, Chief, but she's empty," one of the men called. "What's that? Empty?" "Not a sign of anybody in it or anything. It was at the top of the shaft." The chief sputtered a moment in impotent rage, and then shouted his orders up the shaft. "2 or 3 of you get into that blamed thing and come down, and you examine the walls every inch of the way. Keep your torches going and have your guns ready. I tell you they've got to be in the shaft somewhere." Then he stepped back and waited. The cable moved, and by glancing into the shaft, the chief and his men could see that the box was descending slowly. The chief turned to send a captain outside to warn the men who surrounded the block that closer watch was to be kept. "They're in this block, and they can't get out without being nabbed," he declared. And then the box struck the bottom of the shaft, and with a sigh of relief a lieutenant and 2 men crawled out. "Not a thing," he reported. "We examined every foot of the walls, and there isn't a crack nor a hole a mouse could get through. The top of the shaft is solid wall, and so is the bottom. The Black Star and 3 of his men went in there and took Verbeck with them, and they've gone up in smoke or something." "You're a fool," the chief retorted. He got in the box himself with 2 men, and went up and came down again, and confessed himself bewildered. Reports came in from the streets that not a person had left the block. The Black Star and the others, it seemed, had melted into thin air and drifted out and away. The Black Star at that moment was chuckling softly and assuring himself that his prisoner was not regaining consciousness. He had used the vapor gun in the box before reaching this hole in the wall, because he didn't want his prisoner to know where he had been. For the Black Star intended having his little joke. He and his 3 men had held their sides to keep from laughing aloud as the police went up and down the shaft, so close to them at times that they could hear the muttered curses of the officers. "The entrance to this little room was the best job of all," he said. "They could look right at it and not see it, and if they did see it, they couldn't get in." "But we're due for quite a rest here," one of his men complained. "Don't get nervous," the master criminal warned. "We are due to get out of here before daylight, and don't you forget that. Don't think that I intend to stay here all day tomorrow, waiting for tomorrow night. If we did, we might find that the stupid police had sealed up the bottom and top of the shaft. That'd be lovely, wouldn't it?" He chuckled again as his 3 men shuddered at the thought of being interred alive. He went to the wall and pressed against it, and the panel slid back 3 or 4 inches. Leaning forward carefully, the Black Star glanced down. He could see the flashes of the police torches at the bottom of the shaft, and he could hear Muggs and the chief in a lively argument. Glancing up, he saw the flash of a torch at the top. He reached out, knowing that his hand could not be seen unless several torches were flashed down the shaft at the same time, and pulled at the cable. The box began to ascend. It was halfway to the hole in the wall before the chief noticed it, and then, thinking the men above were raising it, he shouted for them to lower it again. While they conversed by shrieks and yells, the Black Star brought the box opposite the sliding panel and gripped the cable there. The men below and the men above tugged at the cable, but the box remained in place. The Black Star, still chuckling, took pencil and paper from his pocket and scribbled a note, and pinned it to the breast of the unconscious man before him. Then he tumbled his prisoner into the box. "Go down to your friend, the chief, and mystify him, my dear Mr. Verbeck," the Black Star said. "You have not indulged in much action this evening. I trust the chief will unbind you, and that when you regain consciousness you'll join in the chase." He chuckled again, tugged at the cable, and sent the box downward, and then closed the panel and sat down beside his men. "Listen now, and you'll hear a roar," he exclaimed. "But how are we going to get out, sir?" one of the crooks asked. "Don't worry about that. What time is it?" The man flashed a torch and glanced at his watch. "It's almost 2:00. "Ah! Then we'd better get out of here within the hour. It'll be daylight by 4:30, and I want to be back at headquarters before then. You know how I am going, of course." "I know how you'll go if you get out of here," the man replied. "Getting out of here is what is worrying me." "Don't worry. It causes gray hairs. Listen." They could hear a commotion at the bottom of the shaft. The box had reached its destination, and the bound, gagged, and unconscious man had been seen and taken out. "It's Verbeck!" the chief cried. "He's doped, or something." "Vapor gun," Muggs explained. "Then they've sent him back to us. But where did he come from? Answer me that. He didn't come from the top, and there's no place between here and the top where he could come from. Unbind him, you men, and take that gag off. Maybe he can tell us something when he gets rid of that vapor dope. What's this? A note?" One of the men held his torch, and the chief read it swiftly. "Dear Chief, here is Roger Verbeck, safe and sound. Since you don't seem able to make very much war against me, perhaps you'll revive Verbeck and let him get into the game. I've kept him pretty quiet tonight. I'm sending him to you out of the sky, my dear Chief, you might say. At least you don't know where I am sending him from, and cannot find out. I don't know how you got on my trail so swiftly tonight, but it didn't save the bank from losing a vast sum, and didn't help you much, did it? If I ever get my 2 hands on that man, he'll never live to stand trial," the chief promised. "Verbeck conscious yet? We've got to look into this business. I tell you the Black Star's somewhere in this building. He's somewhere in that shaft." "But he can't be," a lieutenant protested. "There isn't a place in the shaft where a man could leave the box." "Nevertheless—" "Verbeck's come to," one of the men cried. They knelt beside him, aided him to sit up, tried to get him to talk. They shot questions at him as bullets come from a machine gun, and he waved them away. "Where did they take you, Verbeck?" the chief demanded. "I don't know. I've been unconscious." "All the time?" "They did it, just after the box started up. That's the last I knew, until now." "They're in that shaft," the chief cried. "I'm going up again to see." End of chapter 33. Recording by Roger Moline. Chapter 34 of The Black Star by Johnston McCulley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Roger Moline. Chapter 34. What Happened to the Chief? The head of the police department, knowing that a crowd surrounded the block now, and that news had gone abroad that the Black Star and some of his men had been cornered, and that certain newspaper reporters were standing by and waiting to see whether the police would be made again to look like fools, grew frantic. Also, his determination to capture the Black Star increased. He had his men drive everyone out of the bank building and guard the offices and corridors, and, leaving 4 men to guard the bottom of the shaft, with 2 others, he got in the box and started to ascend. The Black Star, from his post above, heard the chief issue these orders, and knew the box was on its upward journey. "Couldn't be better," he told his men. "Only 4 at the bottom of the shaft now. You know we have to go, of course. Hurry through the corridor to the narrow flight of stairs in the rear, and climb." "But—" one of his men began. "Silence, fool! The box is almost opposite us." The chief and his 2 men were ascending slowly, examining every inch of the walls with their torches. They stopped for a moment just outside the panel, but evidently saw nothing to make them suspicious, for the box continued its ascent. It went on until it was at the top, and there the chief held a consultation with his men, and examined the lodge hall's walls, making certain by questioning the men on guard that it would have been impossible for the Black Star and his men to have passed through the room without being seen. Then the disgusted and sorely angry chief got into the box with his 2 officers again, and started to descend, more puzzled than before. The Black Star heard the descent begin, and growled orders to his 3 followers. He touched the wall and slipped the panel back 3 inches, and thus he waited, one hand ready to close the aperture instantly, the other holding a vapor gun. Below him, one of his men stretched out on the floor and made ready to grip the cable when the master criminal gave the word. The box continued to descend. The chief was speaking of the futility of examining the walls again. He was going to double the guard around the block, he declared, and wait for daylight, and go through the buildings inch by inch until he found the Black Star. The master criminal's men, all but the 3 with him, had been accounted for, and now were in cells at police headquarters, he was saying. The Black Star hissed a warning to the man on the floor. The box came directly opposite the aperture in the wall. The man on the floor gripped the cable and stopped it, and as he did so the Black Star's vapor gun worked. 3 times he pressed the trigger, filling the box with stupefying gas. The chief was the first to topple forward. The other 2 were unconscious almost instantly. The Black Star and his men staggered backward, holding the little sponges to their nostrils. The air cleared, and then the master crook opened the panel to its greatest extent and hauled the chief of police and his 2 men inside the little room. "Lively now," the Black Star commanded. "Only 4 men at the bottom, remember, and there are 3 of us. I'll hurl a vapor bomb as soon as we get to the bottom, and you be ready with your guns. I'll take one of those suitcases. Number 10, you take the other. And you, Number 6, make sure of at least 2 of the men at the bottom if you can." They got into the box and started it downward, leaving the chief and his 2 men in the halfway room. They mumbled a conversation so that the men below would hear it and think nothing was wrong. Foot by foot they drew nearer the bottom of the shaft. Finally the box jarred and stopped. A bomb crashed at the feet of the 4 men standing less than half a dozen paces away. The cloud of vapor surged at them as the Black Star and his 3 men sprang out. Vapor guns flashed, and the 4 criminals rushed through the narrow corridor toward the rear stairs. They had not hoped to get away without an uproar being raised, and they did not. 2 of the 4 guards shrieked as they fell, and other policemen came running from the front of the bank. They arrived in time to see their comrades falling and to see 4 dusky shapes running down the corridor. Their revolvers spoke, and the Black Star and his men once more found themselves in the midst of a leaden hail. As they got to the bottom of the stairs, one of the men stumbled and fell, coughing because of the wound he had received. The Black Star and the other 2 had no time to stop. It was an axiom of the master criminal's organization that every man should care for himself in such an emergency. "Get away with the loot," was the motto. A man arrested would be bailed out or aided to escape from prison by the organization, if possible. But the others of the organization were waiting to share the loot and could not be denied for the sake of a single man. So the 3 ran on, springing up the stairs 2 at a time, reaching the 2nd floor and going on to the 3rd. Behind them came the determined pursuit. Outside in the streets other officers heard the commotion and prepared for a dash on the part of the crooks. The Black Star hurled another vapor bomb and checked the pursuit for a moment, but not for long. They were on the 4th floor now, and they could tell by the sounds that officers were rushing up the broad stairs in front. The Black Star was glad that the elevators were not running. Had they been, he could have made a swifter getaway, but also the pursuit would have been closer. Now they were panting because of their exertion, but did not slacken their pace. The 5th floor was reached, and half a dozen policemen dashed down a hallway at them. Once more there came a fusillade of bullets, and another of the Black Star's men fell. There remained only himself and one other now, but they kept hold of the 2 suitcases filled with loot. The top floor was above them, and they reached it only by hurling 2 more vapor bombs. They rushed along a hallway toward the front of the building now. They came to where a curving iron stairway led to the roof, and up this they rushed, exposed to the shots of the police as they came into view. The Black Star threw his last bomb. The man behind him staggered and fell, but was upon his feet again instantly. He gasped that he had not been wounded, had only tripped on the edge of a step. They reached the little door at the top, threw it open, and dashed out on the roof. The door was slammed behind them, bolted and barred. The bars constituted another of the Black Star's preparations against emergencies. His men had affixed them the last thing that evening. On the other side the police crashed against the little door, fired into it, and then realized that it was a metal, fireproof door, and proof against their bullets. It was another case where axes would be necessary. It took several minutes to send word down and get axes from below, and then the assault on the door began. They took turns working at it, for this was no easy task. Finally the hinges gave a trifle, and they redoubled their blows, while others behind them got ready to give battle. The word spread below rapidly. The Black Star and one of his men were on the roof, trapped. They would be prisoners or dead soon now. If the police could not get at them through the door, then the fire department would be called, ladders would be raised, and they would be reached that way. The door gave again. Some of the police cheered. With revolvers held ready, they waited for the blow that would hurl the door to the roof and let them through. The door crashed, and a roaring filled their ears. A gust of wind swept back against them. Something dark showed against the sky. They heard a mocking laugh. "His aeroplane! Curse him!" a sergeant cried in anger. "There he goes!" Again they heard the laugh. They fired in the air, knowing as they did that their target already was beyond reach. The beating of the aeroplane's engine grew fainter. The sergeant stepped to the flagpole at the corner of the roof and took from it a bit of paper that had been fastened there. He read it, then put it in his pocket to give his chief. And this is what he read: "Farewell, gentlemen. You gave me a run for my money tonight, battered up some good men of mine, and took others prisoner. But I have triumphed in the end. Perhaps you wonder how the aeroplane happened to be here on the roof, where it could not possibly have landed, though it can take off from here. Why, it was carried up from the lodge hall in sections tonight, after the building watchman had been disposed of, and my men took charge, and expert mechanics worked hard to assemble it. I had not expected to use it, but found it necessary. It was another emergency for which I was prepared. Always prepare for emergencies, and never make mistakes, and you may be successful like me. By the way, I am getting away with quite a fortune, and with the place filled with police. Tell that to the papers, and give my respects to Roger Verbeck and Muggs." "Got away! Got away with the goods!" the sergeant muttered. "Oh, heavens! What will the public say to this? They'll clean out the department from the chief to the office boy." End of chapter 34. Recording by Roger Moline. Chapter 35 of The Black Star by Johnston McCulley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Roger Moline. Chapter 35. An Unexpected Blow. The Black Star took his aeroplane to an altitude of 3,000 feet, circled over the city, and finally started down the river. He gave all his attention to the machine, and did not even glance at the man who sat beside him. Far below were the lights of the city where he had stolen so many fortunes in money and jewels the past 6 months, the city he had terrorized, at whose police he had scoffed, and the home of Roger Verbeck, the young millionaire clubman who had sworn to capture him. Well, Verbeck had not captured him, he thought. He had made the young clubman a laughingstock more than once. He had made his efforts appear childlike and foolish, and so he was satisfied. For he would have to leave this particular city now, he knew. His last 2 adventures had almost resulted in his downfall. In them he had lost many men, including his most trusted lieutenants. The man beside him really was the only one left whom he could trust. He could afford to retire for a time, and that was what he would do, he decided. He had ample funds. He would call the remainder of his band together in a couple of days, at some new headquarters, for he had a feeling that the present one was dangerous after tonight, give them their share of the money on hand, and then pack up and get out. War-ridden Europe did not appeal to him now, but there was Japan and China and the South Seas. He'd spend a year or so touring around, taking life easy, enjoying himself, spending his money, and gloating over some of the magnificent jewels that the band had stolen and which he had claimed in his share of loot. When the country had begun to forget the Black Star, he'd reappear in some other city, organize his band again, and start his depredations anew. It took the Black Star only a few minutes to decide this. Having decided it, he felt better. He looked down at the river and failed to see any craft. "I'll go to headquarters," the Black Star told his man. "You go on with the plane and hide it in the usual place back in the woods, and then get into town. I'll send you word in the usual way within a couple of days where to have the men come for their share. I'm going to give up the present headquarters, for it'll be dangerous after tonight, I am afraid. I'll pack up and get out by noon tomorrow." "Verbeck's roadster is near the front gate," the man reminded him. "That's right. Got to get that out of the way before daylight. You go ahead with the plane, though. I'll get the suitcases in the house, and then run the roadster up the road and drive it into the river off the cliff." He turned the plane toward the shore and descended slowly. On reaching the ground, the master criminal tossed the suitcases overboard, then sprang out himself. "Good night," he said. "Good night, sir." The plane, with its engine roaring, took the air. The Black Star picked up the heavy suitcases and started for the road. After all, he was thinking, it would be a relief to get away and give up his dangerous occupation for a time. He hated to admit it, even to himself, but tonight's business had shaken him. He had almost felt fear, especially when he had been cornered in the halfway room. But he had succeeded. He had made a last big haul. He was safe now. There remained only to leave the headquarters, meet the men, and distribute some money, and then quit the city for the West and China and the South Seas. Crime didn't pay, huh? Well, he had made it pay. He decided that he'd send a last sarcastic note to the police, the newspapers, and to Roger Verbeck, just as he left. He chuckled again now as he thought of Verbeck. It seemed that he had been unable to get into action tonight. How he would rage when told that the Black Star had escaped again! How funny little Muggs would snort! How the fat chief would fuss and fume! Yes, the Black Star had had his fun as well as his profit. He reached the gate and passed through it up the drive to the house. Here he set the suitcases down on the porch and unlocked the front door. Then he took the loot inside, struck a match, and applied it to the wick of a lamp. A hasty glance around the room told him that nothing had been disturbed during his absence. For a moment he stood in the center of the room and listened and looked about. Then he put the suitcases on a table. He threw off hood and mask and overcoat and hat and opened the suitcases. Before him were the bundles of banknotes, the 2 bags of gold, the packages of securities. A fortune! He laughed lightly and went to a cupboard and got out crackers and cheese and a can of fish. He laughed as he ate his simple meal, and promised himself a gorgeous dinner before another 24 hours had passed. Having eaten, he put the remainder of the food away, closed the suitcases again, lifted a trap door in the floor beneath a rug, and put the loot in a hidden box there. He stretched his arms and glanced at his watch. It would be daylight within the half-hour now, and he needed sleep. He decided that he'd retire and rise in about 4 hours. 4 hours of sleep would refresh him enough, he decided, for the time being. He wanted to smuggle himself and his ill-gotten gains into the city by noon. Keen eyes watched his every movement through the keyhole in the door that opened into the adjoining, unused room. The mysterious man who had trailed the abductors there early in the evening was still in the house. The hours had seemed doubly long, but he had waited. He watched the Black Star carefully now. He had made sure that he had returned to the headquarters alone, and now he was awaiting his chance. He knew that the Black Star had a couch in the room on the other side of the headquarters room, and would sleep there if he decided to go to bed. He watched him as he removed coat and vest and took off his shoes and donned a pair of slippers. And then he crept softly across the room, unlocked the door that led to the hall, and slipped out. Foot by foot he made his way along the hall, and noiselessly, for he had removed his shoes. He reached the door of the room where Black Star slept, and crept inside, and went across to the other door, and there, crouching at one side, he waited. The Black Star finished undressing and put on a pair of gorgeous pajamas. Then he turned off the light and started for his couch. He passed through the door. And then he gasped in surprise and alarm, tottered, tried to curse, and fell forward unconscious into the arms of the other man, a victim of his own vapor gun. The man who had caused his downfall laughed aloud now and ran to the lamp to light it again. From a corner he carried ropes and bound the unconscious man securely. He gagged him, too, and propped him up in a chair and tied him in it with ropes. Then he whirled toward the trap door beneath the rug and managed to get it open. He lifted out the suitcases and other boxes in which valuables had been stored. "Money, securities, and jewels," he said. "I guess I'll just take care of these, Mr. Black Star." He laughed again, half in relief and half in pure joy, and then he rushed across to the telephone. For the second time that night he called a number, the number of police headquarters, and then he gave a startling message. End of chapter 35. Recording by Roger Moline. Chapter 36 of The Black Star by Johnston McCulley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Roger Moline. Chapter 36. In custody. When the Black Star opened his eyes, he saw a peculiar-looking individual before him, scarcely half a dozen feet away, who held an automatic pistol in his hand in a threatening manner. This individual was dressed in greasy overalls and jumper, and had a soft hat pulled down low over his forehead. The collar of his jumper was turned up so that scarcely any of the face could be seen except the eyes. His hands were dirty, his hair was black and long, and apparently needed cutting badly. "Well, I've got you all right," the individual growled in a hoarse voice. "Pretty good picking around these diggings, too. Notice the swag I've got here on the table?" He bent forward and tore the gag from the Black Star's mouth. "Talk if you want to," he offered. "Black Star, huh? Big crook, huh?" "Who are you?" the Black Star asked. "What do you care?" "I am interested. Any man who can put me down and out, and I suppose you are the one who did it, interests me strangely. So you think I am the Black Star?" "I know it." "I suppose you want to join my organization and are taking this melodramatic way to show me you're fitted?" "Guess again." "Well, what is the idea, then? I suppose you realize what you are running up against when you tackle the Black Star?" "I know that all right, and I'm not scared." "You're not very communicative," said the other. "Suppose you untie me now, and we'll talk business. If it is money you want—" "Why untie you when I've got it all right here on the table?" "Well, what are you going to do?" "Give you a surprise," came the answer. The Black Star saw the man before him straighten up suddenly. His hand went to his hat, and the hat came off, and with it a black wig. And then he smiled and bowed. "Roger Verbeck!" the Black Star gasped. "At your service, Sir Crook. I said I'd get you, and I have." "But how did you get here so soon? I saw you back at the National Trust, as I was leaving." "Pardon me, my dear Mr. Black Star. You are not very observing, are you? How many times have you seen me, spoken to me?" "Half a dozen, I suppose." "But never paid particular attention to me, did you?" "I never had a chance particularly, as I always saw you under conditions of excitement." "That was one bad mistake you made. You should know me when you meet me face to face." "I know that, all right, but you haven't answered my question. How did you get here so quickly, and alone? How did you know where my headquarters was?" "Naturally, since I was out to get you, I just discovered that." "One of my men turned traitor, I suppose." "Indeed, no. I did it all by my own little self, Mr. Black Star. I said 6 months ago that I could get you, and you dared me to try. You went right ahead with your crimes, and you made a fool of me on several occasions. You always prepared for every possible emergency. That was it. You never made a mistake. You went ahead on your thieving way, and I told you that no criminal could be successful for always, no matter how brainy a man, and that someday you'd make a mistake. You've made one, and now you're going to pay for it. For you're going to jail from here, Mr. Black Star. I'm going to see you in the prisoner's dock, as I swore I should. And I'm going to follow you to the doors of the penitentiary and see them close behind you. You have to pay for your career of crime. Every criminal must pay. He may succeed for a time, but in the end he pays. He can't dodge the law of compensation." "I'm not in jail yet, Mr. Verbeck." "You'll be there soon. I notice you are slipping your foot along the floor. I presume you are looking for the button that throws a trap and opens a pit beneath where I am standing. Might as well give up. I found that trap several hours ago and wrecked the spring. Oh, I've got you this time, Mr. Black Star." "Several hours ago? I don't understand." "You made a mistake, that's all. A bad and a sad mistake." "Suppose you tell me about it." "In good time," Verbeck replied. "I am waiting for some friends of mine, Muggs and the police and some others." "You've called the police?" "To hand you over, yes. How did you escape them tonight? I warned them what you were going to do." "So that's how they discovered it. But how could you warn them when I had you abducted and carried here and had you watched every minute of the time until—" "What do you mean? Explain." "You made a bad mistake," Verbeck reiterated. "That explains everything. Ah!" Down the road a siren shrieked. Verbeck deliberately turned his back on the Black Star, walked through the house, and threw open the front door. 2 automobiles splashed through the mud and stopped near the front gate. "That you, Verbeck?" someone called. "Yes, come right on in." He went back and stood before his prisoner again. "Quick, Verbeck, let me go," the Black Star begged. "I'll do anything you say. Let you give them back the stuff." "Save your breath," Verbeck replied. The crowd rushed in from the road. The chief and Muggs were in the lead, and half a dozen officers, revolvers in their hands as if they were expecting another battle, followed at their heels. They stopped in astonishment when they saw Verbeck. "What?" the chief cried. "No questions," Verbeck begged, laughing. "Here is the Black Star, Chief, and there is the loot he got tonight, and some jewels he obtained in other robberies. See that you don't let him get away this time. I got him, as I said I would. And where is— Ah!" Another man came through the door and stood at Verbeck's side. Every man there except Muggs gasped in surprise, and Muggs only grinned. Here were 2 Verbecks, alike except that one was an inch shorter than the other and slightly thinner in the face. "Here is the explanation, gentlemen," Verbeck said. "I discovered that the Black Star was having me shadowed night and day. The men who shadowed had to report sometime, of course. I got the idea that if I could get someone to take my place, I might shadow the Black Star's shadow, and so find his headquarters. When he threatened 3 weeks ago to abduct me and let me witness his next crime, I realized that here was my chance. Gentlemen, allow me to introduce you to my cousin. His father and mine married sisters. Perhaps that is why we look so much alike." "Your cousin!" the chief gasped. "He has been living out West. I wrote him full details, and he came on to help me. I smuggled him into my house and let him take my place. He went out with Muggs, visited my fiancée in my place, went to my clubs a bit. Only Muggs was in the secret, for I didn't want to take a chance of having that secret leak out. And I shadowed the shadow, waiting for the abduction, and tonight it came. Mr. Black Star, I came here in the rear of my own roadster, which carried your prisoners. I put your watchdog to sleep and entered this house, and I've been here since. I overheard your plans and telephoned the police as soon as you had left. I wanted to be in at the death, of course, but knew I could not get back to the city in time. And I had a suspicion that you'd escape the police at the last minute, as you had so many times before, so I remained here, waiting for you, and when you came, I succeeded in making you my prisoner. While you were gone, I examined the house and found many interesting things. In your excitement at planning and carrying out a big crime, you made a mistake, Mr. Black Star. You didn't use your eyes, didn't observe closely. You took my cousin for me. That's all. And now you must pay. Oh, yes. I must decorate you as you have often in the past decorated me." He took a bit of paper from his pocket and he pinned it to the Black Star's breast, while the master criminal sputtered his wrath. It read, "Mr. Black Star, never depend on the eyes of others, but use your own. Because Muggs drove a roadster and my cousin looks like me, your men took it for granted that my cousin was me, and you let it go at that. That was your mistake. Roger Verbeck. "Now, Chief, take your man," Verbeck concluded. "And don't let him get away this time. And you, Muggs, go out and get the roadster ready. We're going home. Here is the telephone, Chief, if you want to give the glad news to the papers." Muggs turned toward the door. The adventure was over, Muggs knew. He was no longer comrade in arms. Now he was chauffeur and valet and all-around man to Roger Verbeck, until that young gentleman should feel the call of adventure again. The End. End of Chapter 36. Recording by Roger Moline. End of The Black Star by Johnston McCulley.